This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I've had a lot of weird experiences urban exploring over the years, but what happened at that warehouse in Oakland still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. I can't stop wondering what I stumbled into. It's been 3 weeks, and I still can't sleep right. It started with rumors I kept hearing about this place locals called the Fortress. People in the urban exploring community had mentioned it online, saying it was built by some paranoid ghost or something. Most of these stories are just hype, but a few details kept coming up that caught my attention, especially about how the inside didn't match the outside. Last month, I finally decided to check it out. It was just off Victor Street in this industrial area where everything's either abandoned or on its way there. From the outside, it looked like any other forgotten warehouse. Rusted metal panels, broken windows, graffiti. Nothing special. Just another dead building waiting for demolition. I parked a few blocks away around 5 in the afternoon. Not the smartest time to go exploring, but I wanted enough daylight to see the place properly. I brought my usual gear: headlamp, backup flashlight, gloves, mask — those old buildings are full of asbestos and who knows what else — and a small crowbar. Not to break anything, just to pry stuff if needed. Getting in was easier than I expected. The east side had a section where the roof had partially collapsed, creating a gap between the wall and ceiling. I climbed some shipping containers stacked nearby and slipped through. The smell hit me first. Jesus Christ, that smell. It was this horrible mix of piss, mildew, and something metallic that reminded me of blood. I've been in plenty of places where homeless people and addicts hang out, but this was different, heavier, older somehow. The floor was absolutely covered in needles. Not just a few scattered here and there, I mean thousands of them, like a carpet. Some looked ancient, rusted and bent, others looked newer. I'm always careful, but seeing that made me double-check my boots. No way was I risking getting stuck. I made my way deeper, using my flashlight to navigate around the worst spots. The main floor was this huge open space with concrete pillars. The walls were mostly drywall, but weirdly reinforced with metal sheets in some places. Someone had spent serious money on this place at some point. Behind a loose panel in the wall, I found this box with brand new needles, still in plastic packaging. Not just a few, like a whole case of them. It was weird because everything else seemed ransacked, but this was hidden and untouched, like someone had stashed it expecting to come back. But the doors were what started freaking me out. Every single interior door had been modified like crazy. We're talking serious paranoid shit. Thick steel bars bolted across them, pipes welded into these anchor points in the walls, multiple deadbolts and padlocks. The really unsettling part was that some doors were barricaded from the inside, others from the outside. Like whoever built this couldn't decide if they were trying to keep danger out or something worse in. I found this staircase leading up to a mezzanine level, all rust-covered steel with these warning signs that were too faded to read. At the top was this massive steel hatch, like something you'd see on a ship. It was propped open with a piece of concrete, but I could see the mechanism, these thick cables and rusty pulleys designed to drop it shut. Who the hell needs that in a warehouse? The upper level had these red initials painted on the walls. SS. No idea what they meant, but they were everywhere. The paint looked old, not like recent graffiti. I was taking pictures of everything with my phone, trying to document it all. Then I started noticing these sections of wall that didn't line up right. One of them had a small gap that shouldn't have been there. When I pushed on it, it swung inward, a hidden door leading to this narrow passage between walls. The passage had wooden studs, but they were spaced way closer together than normal construction, almost like cells. I followed one passage about 30 feet before it opened into this small room that made my heart stop. The floor was bare concrete, walls unfinished, but they were covered in these deep scratches, fingernail scratches, hundreds of them concentrated around the door frame. And the door itself, it only locked from the outside. A room designed to keep someone in, hidden away between walls where nobody would hear them. I stood there for what felt like forever, my flashlight beam shaking over those scratches. I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened in that room, who had been kept there, and why. The whole time I was in the building, I felt this pressure, like the walls were watching me. I know how that sounds, but it wasn't just my imagination. The place felt designed to hide secrets. I'd heard rumors about a tunnel under the warehouse, supposedly connecting to the subway system or maybe an old storm drain. People online claimed there was an entrance somewhere in the building. I spent almost an hour looking for it, but found nothing definitive. Just a section of floor in the back corner that sounded hollow when I tapped it, but I couldn't find a way to open it. By this point, I was getting seriously creeped out. I decided to do one last sweep of the main floor before leaving. That's when I noticed something weird about one of the support columns. It had these small metal brackets attached to it at different heights. They looked like they could hold shelves, but there weren't any shelves there. I shined my flashlight up and saw something that made my blood run cold. There were these dark stains on the ceiling above the column in a circular pattern. And when I looked closer at the column itself, I could see similar stains running down the sides, old, dark stains that had soaked into the concrete. While I was examining this, I heard a sound from somewhere in the building, a metallic click, like a door latch. I froze, listening. For a few minutes, there was nothing. Then I heard something else, a scraping sound, like something heavy being dragged across the floor, coming from the upper level. I'm not ashamed to admit I panicked a bit. I turned off my flashlight and stood completely still in the darkness, trying to control my breathing. The scraping stopped, then started again, closer to the staircase. I needed to get out. The way I'd come in was on the other side of the warehouse, but I remembered seeing a broken window on the ground floor, not far from where I was standing. I turned my light back on, keeping it pointed at the floor, and moved as quietly as I could toward where I thought the window was. I found it and was about to climb through when I noticed something on the windowsill, a small pile of dust or powder arranged in a straight line across the entire opening. It was too deliberate to be random. Someone had put it there, like some kind of marker or alarm to show if anyone had passed through. I carefully brushed a small section away and squeezed through the window, trying not to disturb the rest of the line. Outside, the sun was just starting to set, and the industrial area looked completely deserted. I walked quickly back to my car, constantly checking over my shoulder. When I got home, I uploaded all my photos to my computer and started researching the building's history. I found out it had been owned by a company called Sentinel Storage until 2008, when it was purchased by a private owner whose name was redacted in the public records. The building had no reported activity until 2013, when police had responded to complaints about drug use there. After that, nothing, like it had been forgotten by everyone except the urban explorers who occasionally mentioned it online. The next day, I went back to look at the warehouse from outside. I don't know why. some compulsion to understand what I'd seen. But when I got there, something was different. The broken window I'd escaped through had been boarded up with fresh plywood, and on the east side, where I'd first entered, there was a new padlock on a chain securing a section of fence that hadn't been locked before. Someone had been there after me, securing the building, making sure no one else could get in, or maybe making sure whatever was inside couldn't get out. I've tried talking to a few other explorers about the place, but no one seems to know much. One guy mentioned that the SS might stand for Sentinel Storage, the original owner, but that doesn't explain the modifications or the hidden rooms. The thing that keeps me up at night isn't what I saw, it's what I didn't see. Who built those hidden passages? Why design a room that only locks from the outside? And what was happening in that building that required ship-like hatches and multiple barricades? I keep checking the photos I took, looking for something I missed. Last week, I noticed something in one of the pictures of the main floor, a shadow in the corner that looks like a person standing there. But I was alone in that building. At least I thought I was. I drive by the warehouse sometimes just to see if anything's changed. Yesterday, I noticed a white van parked outside. No markings, no windows in the back, just sitting there in the middle of the day when the whole area is usually deserted. I drove around the block to get a better look, but when I came back, the van was gone. I still don't know what that warehouse was really used for. But whatever happened there, I'm sure of one thing. Those walls were built to keep secrets. And I can't shake the feeling that by entering that place, I've become part of its secret too. Story 2. I still can't sleep through the night 4 months later. Every time I close my eyes, I see those empty bloodshot eyes staring at me in my rearview mirror. I'm writing this partly as therapy, but also as a warning. Please, please don't drive alone at night through rural areas if you can help it. This happened back in October when I was making a cross-country drive to visit my sister in Oregon. I was between jobs and trying to save money wherever I could, so I came up with what I thought was a clever plan to avoid paying for a hotel. I'd leave in the evening, drive through the night, rest at rest areas when needed, and arrive at my destination the following afternoon. I've pulled all-nighters before, and with enough caffeine and music, I figured I could handle it. I packed my Honda Civic with snacks, water bottles, energy drinks, and made a specific road trip playlist. I even had my route all mapped out with highlighted areas where I could stop for gas or brakes. Looking back, the amount of planning I put into saving $100 on a motel seems ridiculous now. I hit the road around 7 in the evening. The first few hours were actually nice. Hardly any traffic, a beautiful sunset, and that peaceful feeling of having the highway almost to yourself. I kept the music loud and the windows cracked for fresh air, feeling pretty good about my decision. Around 9:30, after driving for about 2.5 hours, I needed gas. The highway had gotten increasingly empty, with nothing but darkness and sparse signs for small towns I'd never heard of. When I finally saw a gas station sign, I took the exit without hesitation. It was one of those old-school places, just 4 pumps with no overhead covering, and a small convenience store that was already closed for the night. The pumps were still operational with card payment, but the whole place was deserted and dimly lit by a single flickering light pole. I pulled up to the pump closest to that light, telling myself it was just because I could see better there, not because I was starting to feel uneasy. I was in the middle of filling up when headlights appeared on the road. A dark blue sedan turned into the station, moving unusually slow, like the driver was studying the place. Instead of pulling up to one of the 3 empty pumps, The car came directly behind mine, blocking me in. Something about that made my stomach drop. There was no reason to park there when the entire station was empty. The engine stayed running for what felt like forever before finally shutting off. I pretended to be focused on the gas pump, but kept watch from the corner of my eye. When the driver's door finally opened, I nearly jumped. The man who stepped out was tall, at least 6 feet, wearing a red flannel shirt and black jeans. He didn't acknowledge me at first, just stood there scanning the area. When he finally looked my way, I automatically gave that awkward half smile you give to strangers, but he didn't return it. He just stared. His eyes are what I remember most vividly. They were sunken in, with heavy lids that made him look extremely tired, but there was this intensity behind them that suggested the opposite, like he was on something that kept him wide awake despite exhaustion. His movements were too deliberate, too controlled for someone who should be moving with the casualness of a regular traveler. "Evening," he finally said, and even that single word sounded wrong, too measured, like he'd rehearsed it. I mumbled something back and busied myself with finishing up. I could feel him watching me the entire time. He hadn't even moved toward the pumps yet, just stood there leaning against his car, watching. When the pump clicked off, I hurriedly replaced the nozzle, screwed my gas cap back on, and jumped into my car, locking the doors immediately. As I pulled away, I checked my mirror and saw him still standing there, watching me leave. He hadn't pumped a single drop of gas. I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe he was just waiting for someone. Maybe he realized he'd stopped at the wrong station. Maybe he was just socially awkward. I cranked up my music and focused on the road ahead, pushing the encounter out of my mind. For the next few hours, I drove without incident. The roads got increasingly empty as I moved into more rural areas. Around midnight, it started to rain, not a downpour, but a steady drizzle that made visibility worse and added to my growing fatigue. My eyes were getting heavy, and I kept catching myself drifting slightly before jerking the wheel back. By 1 a.m, I knew I needed to stop. I was dangerously tired, and no destination was worth risking my life over. I spotted another gas station up ahead, a bit larger than the last one, but still deserted at this hour. The convenience store was dark, but a sign indicated it would open at 5 a.m. Perfect. I could nap for a few hours, then grab coffee when they opened. I pulled in, filled my tank again, and then parked in a spot near the front of the store where there was decent lighting. I locked all my doors, reclined my seat slightly, and set an alarm on my phone for 30 minutes. Just enough rest to get me safely to the next major town. I'm not sure if I fully fell asleep, but I remember jerking awake suddenly, that feeling of falling in a dream shocking me back to consciousness. The rain had picked up, drumming steadily on the roof. I checked my phone. I'd only been resting for about 20 minutes. That's when I noticed another car had pulled into the lot while I was dozing. It was parked about 4 spaces away, partially visible through the rain-streaked windows. A dark blue sedan. My heart started hammering immediately. It couldn't be the same car, I thought. That would be impossible. Just a coincidence. But something made me stare at it longer, and the more I looked, the more certain I became. It was the same car from the gas station hours ago and hundreds of miles back. I sat up straighter, scanning the area for the driver. The car was empty as far as I could tell. Maybe he was inside the store, but the store was clearly closed, all lights off. I checked the restroom area at the side of the building. No lights, no movement. That's when the worst thought hit me. If he wasn't in his car, and he wasn't in the store, I slowly turned to look in my back seat, my entire body ice cold with dread. And there he was, crouched down behind my seat, but visible now in my rearview mirror. Those same heavy-lidded eyes, wide open and staring directly at me. How long had he been there? Had he slipped in when I was pumping gas? Did he have a key to my car somehow? Our eyes locked in the mirror for what felt like an eternity, but was probably less than a second. Then he moved, lunging forward between the front seats toward me. I've never moved so fast in my life. I flung my door open and bolted from the car, my keys still in the ignition. I ran blindly through the rain, across the parking lot, and into the woods beyond the gas station. I didn't look back until I'd pushed through underbrush for what felt like minutes, my clothes soaked and torn by branches. When I finally stopped, gasping for breath, I could see the gas station through the trees. My car had rolled backward slightly after I'd left it. I guess I hadn't put it fully in park in my panic. It stopped when it gently hit a curb. From my hiding spot, I watched in horror as my headlights suddenly came on. Someone was in the driver's seat now. My car backed up, straightened out, and then slowly drove away. He had taken my car, with my phone, wallet, everything. I stayed hidden for another 30 minutes, trembling uncontrollably, before I worked up the courage to return to the gas station. The blue sedan was still there. The keys were in the ignition, like he'd left them there deliberately when he decided to hide in my car instead. I approached cautiously, terrified he might be playing the same trick on me. I checked the back seat, the trunk, underneath the car. It was empty. But when I finally got the courage to open the door, what I found inside was worse than finding him. There were items scattered throughout the car: a woman's purse, 3 different cell phones, a child's backpack, a collection of wallets with various IDs, none matching the car's registration I found in the glove compartment. The car belonged to someone named Michael Dawson from Oklahoma, but he wasn't among any of the ID photos I found. I drove the car to the nearest police station, about 45 minutes away. They took my statement and examined the vehicle. They told me later their theory was that this man had been following the highways for months, stealing cars and possessions from travelers. Based on what I described, they think he typically waited until his victims were back on isolated roads before revealing himself from the back seat. I was just lucky I spotted him while we were still at the gas station. They never found him or my car. They searched, put out alerts, checked the items in the car for DNA and fingerprints. But as far as I know, nothing came of it. There's still someone out there on those empty highways, watching for tired drivers, people alone, vulnerable. I took a bus the rest of the way to my sister's place, and I flew home when it was time to leave. I don't drive alone at night anymore. I don't stop at isolated gas stations. I always check my back seat before getting in my car, the replacement car that I bought with money I had to borrow because everything I had was in that Honda. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, feeling like someone's watching me, and I wonder how many people he's done this to since me. How many didn't notice him in time? How many didn't get away? So please, if you're driving alone, especially at night, be careful. Always check your back seat. Always lock your doors immediately after getting gas. And if you can avoid it, don't travel those empty rural highways alone after dark. You never know who's out there watching, waiting for the perfect moment when you're tired, isolated, and vulnerable. Story 3. I still can't explain what happened during our camping trip at Red Feathers Lake last summer. It's been nearly a year, and I've replayed those 3 days over and over in my head, trying to make sense of it. I'm not a superstitious person. I work in IT, for God's sake. But what we experienced out there in the Colorado wilderness wasn't normal. I'm only writing this down now because the nightmares won't stop, and maybe putting it into words will help. My wife Sarah and I had planned this trip with her brother Mike and his 3 boys, Tyler, 12, Jake, 9, and Ethan, 7, for months. We'd camped at Red Feathers before, but this time we wanted to try a more remote spot that Mike had heard about from a colleague, about 4 miles off the main camping areas. The spot required a bit of off-roading to reach, but Mike had his F-150 and we had our Subaru Outback, which handled those dirt roads fine. We brought our 2 dogs, Cooper and Bailey, both German shepherds who love the outdoors. Mike's boys were excited about fishing in the lake and exploring the woods. The spot was perfect when we arrived, a clearing surrounded by dense pine forest, with the lake visible through the trees about 200 yards away. We set up our tents, one large one for Mike and the boys, and another for Sarah and me. We had a fire pit, a picnic table we'd brought, and enough supplies for 5 days. The first day was exactly what we'd hoped for. The weather was perfect, mid-70s, partly cloudy. We set up camp, hiked down to the lake, and the boys caught some small trout while Sarah and I collected firewood. Cooper and Bailey ran around happily, occasionally chasing squirrels, but always returning when called. That night, we cooked the fish, roasted marshmallows, and Mike told the boys some tame, scary stories. Nothing crazy, just the usual camping stuff. We all went to bed around 10, tired but happy. I woke up around 3 in the morning to Cooper growling. Not his playful growl, but the deep, serious one that usually means something's wrong. I unzipped the tent and peeked out. Both dogs were standing at the edge of our campsite, fur raised along their backs, staring into the darkness between the trees. I called them back quietly, not wanting to wake everyone, but they wouldn't move. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out. The night was unnaturally quiet. Usually the woods at night are full of sounds, crickets, frogs, the rustling of small animals, but there was nothing, just dead silence and the soft panting of the dogs. I swept my flashlight across the tree line but saw nothing unusual. After a few minutes, I managed to coax the dogs back to the tent, though they remained restless throughout the night. I mentioned it to Sarah and Mike the next morning, but we shrugged it off. Probably just a deer or something, Mike said while flipping pancakes on our portable stove. The boys were excited about hiking around the lake that day, so we packed some sandwiches and headed out. The dogs seemed normal again in the daylight, running ahead on the trail with the boys. But when we returned to camp around 2 in the afternoon, something was off. Our 5-gallon water jugs, we'd brought 3 of them, were all empty. Not just lower than we remembered, but completely empty. The caps were still on, but when I unscrewed one, there wasn't a drop inside. "Did you guys use the water before we left?" Sarah asked the boys, who all shook their heads. "Maybe they leaked," Mike suggested, but when I checked, there were no puddles, no wet ground beneath them. Just 3 bone-dry containers that had been full that morning. "I don't like this," Sarah whispered to me, while Mike distracted the boys with a game of cards. "It doesn't make sense," I agreed, but what could we say? That someone or something had stolen our water? We had another 10 gallons in the cars, so we brought those to the campsite and decided to be more vigilant. As the afternoon wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling we were being watched. The forest seemed different somehow, still beautiful, but with an underlying wrongness I couldn't quite pinpoint. The dogs felt it too. They stayed close to camp, no longer venturing toward the trees, and would occasionally stop to stare at the same spot in the forest, hackles raised. By evening, we were all on edge. though trying not to show it for the kids' sake. Mike kept looking over his shoulder while cooking dinner. Sarah jumped at every snapping twig. Even the boys were quieter than usual. Cooper and Bailey refused to leave our sides, pressing against our legs when we sat around the fire. "Let's head back tomorrow," I suggested quietly to Mike and Sarah after the boys had gone to bed. "We can say the weather's turning or something." They both nodded immediately, looking relieved at the suggestion. "I keep feeling like someone's watching us," Sarah admitted. "Like right now, I can feel eyes on the back of my neck." "Me too," Mike said, poking the fire nervously. "And it's too quiet. Have you noticed? No owls, no nothing." He was right. The forest was silent again, except for the crackling of our fire. We decided to leave first thing in the morning, but agreed not to alarm the boys. They'd been looking forward to this trip for months. To make their last night special, Mike suggested we take them on a snipe hunt before we packed up, a harmless prank where you tell kids to go search for a made-up animal called a snipe. It's a camping tradition, and we'd done it with the boys before. After breakfast the next morning, while we were slowly packing up, Mike told the boys about the snipe hunt. They were excited, even though Tyler, being 12, probably knew it was just a game. We gave them paper bags to catch the snipes and told them to stay within shouting distance. The boys ran off, laughing and calling for snipes, while Mike, Sarah, and I continued breaking down camp. The dogs were agitated again, both of them pacing the perimeter of our campsite and growling softly. About 15 minutes later, we heard the boys screaming, not playful screams, real terrified screams. Mike took off running toward the sound, and Sarah and I followed, the dogs sprinting ahead of us. We found the boys about 200 yards from camp, huddled together, Tyler with his arms around his younger brothers protectively. They were shaking and pointing toward a dense patch of trees. "Something was throwing rocks at us," Tyler said, his voice trembling. "Big ones." Sure enough, there were several rocks scattered around them, not small pebbles, but hefty stones the size of my fist. One had apparently hit Jake on the shoulder, leaving a nasty bruise that was already forming. "Did you see who did it?" Mike asked, scanning the trees. "Not who," Ethan whispered. "What? It was tall, really tall." I felt the hairs on my neck stand up as I looked toward where they were pointing. The forest was thick there, shadows deep even in the morning light. As I stared, I caught a glimpse of something moving between two pines. A figure, at least 7 feet tall and unnaturally thin, ducking behind a tree. It moved wrong, too fluid and quick for its size. "Everyone back to camp," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Now." We hurried back, the boys between us, dogs flanking us and continuously looking back. When we reached the campsite, we abandoned any pretense of a leisurely departure. We threw our remaining gear into bags, collapsed the tents haphazardly, and loaded everything into the vehicles in record time. As we were about to leave, Cooper let out a bark unlike anything I'd ever heard from him, a sound of pure terror. He was looking toward the tree line where our trail to the lake began. There, just visible at the edge of the clearing, was a dark shape. It wasn't quite human, though it stood on 2 legs. Its proportions were all wrong, limbs too long, torso too narrow, and it was watching us. I couldn't make out a face, but I could feel its attention fixed on us like a physical weight. "Get in the cars," I said, my mouth dry. "Now." Mike took the boys in his truck, and Sarah and I shoved the dogs into our Outback. We peeled out of there, Mike leading the way down the rough dirt road that would take us back to the main camping area. About a mile from our campsite, Mike's truck suddenly braked. I stopped behind him, and he got out, pointing to something ahead. The side of the road was littered with animal remains. Not old bones, but fresh kills. Rabbits, squirrels, what looked like part of a deer, all torn apart and scattered across 20 feet of road. "What the hell?" Sarah whispered, clutching my arm. Mike hurried back to his truck, and we continued, driving faster now, despite the rough terrain. The dogs were going crazy in the back seat, barking and whining. Through my rearview mirror, I kept catching movements in the forest alongside the road, something keeping pace with us, moving from tree to tree. Another half-mile down the road, we came across something that still haunts my dreams. An old green school bus was parked, abandoned, on the side of the road. It hadn't been there when we came in 2 days earlier. The windows were covered with newspapers, and strange symbols were scratched into the faded paint. Not graffiti, not anything I recognized. They looked old, primitive somehow. Mike stopped again, and I pulled up beside him, rolling down my window. "We need to get out of here," he said, his face pale. "But look at that." Beyond the bus was a clearing we hadn't noticed on our way in. In the center was an enormous fire pit, much bigger than any normal campfire, filled with what could only be described as hundreds of bones. Around the clearing, suspended from tree branches, were animal carcasses in various states of decay. Some fresh, some merely skin stretched over bone. "Go, go, go!" Sarah screamed, and Mike floored it, his truck spitting dirt as it accelerated. I followed, pushing our Outback to its limits on the rough road. Through the trees, I could see something moving parallel to us, faster than a human could run, darting between trunks, always just out of clear sight. When we finally reached the main road, we didn't stop until we hit the ranger station 15 miles away. We reported what we'd found: the bus, the animal remains, the rock throwing. The ranger took our statements but looked skeptical. He said they'd send someone to check it out, but mentioned they hadn't issued permits for camping in that specific area recently. It was prone to flooding, he said. We drove home in a daze. That night, after dropping off Mike and the boys, Sarah and I sat in silence in our living room, unable to process what we'd seen. The dogs refused to leave our sides for days afterward. A week later, Mike called. The rangers had found nothing. No bus, no bones, no animal remains. The area showed no signs of recent camping. They suggested we might have been in a different location than we thought. But I know what we saw. I know what followed us through those trees. Whatever it wasn't human. And it wanted us gone from its territory. The dogs still won't go near the shed where we keep our camping gear. And sometimes, when I'm driving home late at night through areas where the streetlights don't quite reach, I catch glimpses of something tall and thin, moving just beyond the light's edge. I don't go camping anymore. Story 4. I still can't believe it's been 14 years since it happened. 14 years, and I still wake up some nights feeling those hands on my legs, pulling me down. I've never told this story online before, but I need to get it out there. Maybe someone else has experienced something similar. Maybe I'm not crazy. Back in the summer of 2009, I was traveling through Mexico with 3 friends, Marisa, Diego, and Chris. We were all in our mid-20s, eager to explore, and honestly pretty reckless. We'd met at university in Texas and decided to take a month-long trip together before settling into our careers. I had family in Mexico, so I'd suggested we spend some time in the Yucatan Peninsula. My grandmother was from there, and she always told me stories about the cenotes. These incredible natural sinkholes filled with the clearest water you've ever seen. In the stories she told, the ancient Maya believed cenotes were sacred passageways to the underworld, sea bulba. I thought they were just cool swimming spots then. God, I wish I'd paid more attention to her warnings. We'd been traveling for about 2 weeks when we decided to visit this cenote that wasn't on the regular tourist trail. It was called Cenote Azul Oscuro. I remember Diego joking about how it meant dark blue cenote and saying, "Let's hope it's not too dark, right?" We all laughed. We were idiots. The cenote was about an hour's drive from where we were staying in Tulum. We hired a local guide named Miguel to take us there. He was quiet on the drive, which I didn't think much of at the time. When we asked him if he'd been to this cenote before, he just nodded and said, "Sí, pero no para nadar." Yes, but not for swimming. Again, we didn't think much of it. The path to the cenote was overgrown, and we had to hike for about 20 minutes through dense jungle. It was hot, maybe 95 degrees, and by the time we got there, we were all sweaty and irritable. But then we saw it, and everything else just faded away. Imagine a perfect circle cut into the earth, maybe 80 feet across, with steep limestone walls descending about 30 feet to the water. The water itself was this impossible shade of blue, so clear you could see straight to the bottom in the shallower parts, but in the center, it just became this deep, mesmerizing indigo. There were vines and roots hanging down from the edges, and sunlight streamed through in beams, lighting up the water in patches. Miguel told us he'd wait at the entrance and to be careful. He also mentioned we should be out before 4 p.m. because the water changes. We figured he meant the lighting or something, so we agreed and headed down the stone steps carved into the cenote wall. There was a wooden platform about halfway down with some rocks jutting out from the wall. Marisa and I decided to sit on these rocks while Diego and Chris immediately jumped in. The water was cool, a relief from the humidity. I remember dipping my feet in and feeling this incredible sense of peace. For maybe half an hour, everything was perfect. Marisa and I were sitting side by side on this flat rock about 3 feet above the water. We were chatting about the rest of our trip, watching the guys swim around. I remember so clearly what happened next. I felt something brush against my foot, just lightly at first, like when seaweed touches you in the ocean. I pulled my foot up instinctively, but didn't think much of it. Then it happened again, more forcefully, like fingers wrapping around my ankle for just a second before letting go. I was about to say something to Marisa when she suddenly screamed. It wasn't a playful scream, it was pure terror. Her body jerked backward, then forward, like something had pulled her. Before I could react, she was sliding off the rock into the water, but as she fell, she grabbed my arm in panic. Her grip was so tight, and I wasn't balanced, I tumbled in right after her. The initial shock of hitting the water disoriented me. When I surfaced, Marisa was already screaming, "Something's grabbing me! Oh my God, something's grabbing my legs!" I thought she was panicking, maybe kicking up against plants or rocks. Then I felt it too. Hands. Multiple hands on my calves and ankles. Not gentle, not uncertain. They were gripping hard, with what felt like bony fingers digging into my skin. The sensation was unmistakable. These were hands, not plants or fish or my imagination. They were pulling downward, dragging both of us toward the center of the cenote. Diego and Chris swam over, thinking we were joking around at first. I remember Chris's face changing when he saw the genuine terror in my eyes. "Something's pulling us," I managed to shout before being yanked beneath the surface again. Underwater, everything changed. The cenote that had looked so beautiful from above became a nightmare below. The water felt colder, darker, as if we'd somehow sunk into an entirely different body of water. The crystal clarity was gone, replaced by a murky blue-black. And the hands, God, the hands wouldn't let go. I could feel them distinctly now. Thin, sharp fingers with what felt like long nails or claws scraping against my skin as they pulled. I kicked frantically, but for every inch I moved upward, they dragged me down 2 more. My lungs were burning. I couldn't see Marissa anymore. When I broke the surface again, I was gasping, choking on water. I could hear Marissa, somewhere to my left, sobbing between desperate breaths. Diego had reached her and was trying to pull her toward the edge, but he was struggling. "Something's fighting me," he yelled. "It's pulling her the other way." Chris grabbed my arm and started swimming backward, pulling me with him. I felt the resistance immediately. Whatever had hold of my legs was strong, unnaturally strong. It was like a tug of war with me as the rope. My legs felt like they were being torn from my body. The pulling suddenly intensified and I went under again. This time I swear I heard something underwater, a sound that wasn't bubbles or movement. It was like whispers, multiple voices speaking in words I couldn't understand. The water around me vibrated with it. I opened my eyes underwater, and although everything was blurry, I swear I saw shapes moving in the depths below me. Not fish, not plants. They were too deliberate in their movements, too humanoid in their outlines, and they were coming up from the bottom, rising from the darkest part of the cenote. When Chris yanked me back to the surface, I was screaming before my face even cleared the water. "Get me out! Please get me out!" I've never begged like that in my life, before or since. Diego was now pulling Marissa toward the steps with Miguel's help. He must have heard the screaming and come down. Chris was dragging me the same way, but my body kept jerking violently backward, like something was yanking me in pulses. The sensation changed as we got closer to the edge. The hands became more desperate, clawing rather than gripping. I felt something rake down my calf, and later I'd find 3 long scratches there, like someone had dragged their nails down my leg with all their strength. Finally, mercifully, Miguel and Diego pulled Marissa onto the lowest step. She collapsed, coughing up water, her legs covered in red marks and scratches. Chris managed to get me to the edge too, but as he tried to lift me out, I felt one final powerful yank. For a split second, I was suspended between 2 forces, Chris pulling my arms and whatever was in the water pulling my legs. I screamed as pain shot through my shoulders, and then suddenly the force released me. I flew forward onto the steps, crashing into Chris and Miguel. We scrambled up those stone steps faster than I thought possible. None of us spoke until we reached the top. When we finally stopped to catch our breath, I looked back down at the cenote. The water was still that same beautiful blue, completely undisturbed, as if nothing had happened. Marissa wouldn't stop shaking. She had bruises forming on her ankles and calves, perfect fingerprints, some small like a child's hand, others larger. I had the same marks, plus those 3 long scratches that were beginning to bleed. What the hell was that? Diego kept asking, looking at Miguel, who stood silent, his face ashen. When Miguel finally spoke, he said something I'll never forget. "Las manos de los que no pudieron salir." The hands of those who couldn't get out. He explained, reluctantly, that this particular cenote had a history. Local people believed it connected to Xibalba more directly than others. There were stories of people drowning there, even strong swimmers, pulled down by unseen forces. Some bodies were never recovered. The elders said that those who died in the cenote were trapped between worlds, and they tried to pull others down to join them. "Why didn't you tell us this before?" Chris demanded. Miguel looked away. "Tourists don't believe. They laugh, and I needed the money." We didn't say much on the drive back. What could we say? We had just been attacked by something impossible, something that defied explanation. The marks on our legs were real, though. The terror was real. We cut our trip short and flew home 3 days later. Marissa and I couldn't even take showers without panicking. We had to switch to baths, and even then, we couldn't fully submerge. I've spent years trying to rationalize what happened. Maybe it was an undercurrent, some kind of sinkhole effect. Maybe there were plants we got tangled in. Maybe we both had panic attacks simultaneously and imagined the hands. But I know what I felt. I know what grabbed me in that cenote. It wasn't natural. It wasn't random. It was deliberate. It was hungry. I've researched cenotes extensively since then. The Maya really did believe they were portals to the underworld. They performed sacrifices there, dropping valuable objects and sometimes people into the depths as offerings to the gods. Some cenotes have been found with human remains at the bottom, hundreds of them. Who knows how many people have died in that particular cenote over the centuries? How many souls might be trapped there, reaching upward, desperate for contact, for escape? I've never gone swimming since that day. Not in pools, not in the ocean, not even in bathtubs. The fear isn't rational, but it's there. Whenever water rises past my knees, I feel phantom fingers on my legs again. Sometimes I dream about it. In the dreams, I'm always pulled all the way down, past the bottom of the cenote into some dark, endless space below. And there are faces there, watching me descend, reaching for me with those bony hands. Marissa moved to Colorado after that trip, about as far from large bodies of water as she could get. We don't talk about what happened, but sometimes she'll text me when it rains heavily. "You okay?" And I know exactly what she means. I still have 3 thin white scars on my left calf. Sometimes they seem to tingle when I'm near water. A reminder, maybe. A warning. I don't know what was in that cenote 14 years ago. I don't know if it's still there waiting. But if you're ever in Mexico and someone offers to take you to a cenote off the tourist path, especially one called Azul Oscuro, please stay away. Some waters don't want to be disturbed. Some hands never stop reaching. Story 5. I've never shared this story before, but I need to get it off my chest. It happened 3 years ago when I was 17, and I still have nightmares about it sometimes. I used to babysit regularly for extra cash. I was saving up for college and wanted a decent laptop. But after that night, I never babysat again. It was a Friday in October. Nothing special about the day, really. I'd been babysitting for the Millers for about 6 months by then. They lived in this nice 2-story house in Pine Grove, one of those neighborhoods where all the houses look similar but cost way more than they should. Mr. and Mrs. Miller had a standing date night every Friday, and I was their regular sitter for their 4-year-old son, Ethan. I arrived at their place around 8 that evening. Mrs. Miller was wearing this fancy black dress, and Mr. Miller was fixing his tie in the hallway mirror when I walked in. They seemed in a hurry, which wasn't unusual. "Thanks for coming, Jamie," Mrs. Miller said, grabbing her purse from the counter. "Ethan's already asleep. He was exhausted from his swimming lesson today. Hopefully he'll stay down all night." Mr. Miller handed me the usual list of emergency contacts. "We'll be at the new Italian place downtown, then maybe catch a movie. Should be back around midnight or 1. "No problem," I said, stuffing the paper in my pocket. "Have fun." After they left, I did my usual walkthrough of the house. It was just something I always did, checking doors and windows, making sure everything was locked up tight. Their house was really nice, lots of expensive-looking artwork and furniture that probably cost more than my mom's car. I went upstairs quietly to check on Ethan. He was fast asleep in his race car bed, clutching his favorite stuffed dinosaur. With everything secure and Ethan sleeping soundly, I settled on the living room couch and pulled out my phone. I scrolled through Instagram for a while, texted my friend Zoe about plans for the weekend, and then put on the TV with the volume low. Just the usual boring babysitting night. About an hour later, around 9:15, my phone rang. It was Mrs. Miller. "Hey Jamie, did you just try to call me?" Her voice sounded normal, just curious. "No, I didn't call you," I replied, a bit confused. "Everything's fine here. Ethan's still asleep." "Oh, that's weird. I had a missed call from our home number about 5 minutes ago. Must have been a glitch or something." "That's strange," I said, glancing at the landline on the side table. "I haven't touched the house phone." "Well, no worries then. Probably just a crossed line or something. We'll be home later." After we hung up, I felt a weird sensation in my stomach. I hadn't touched their house phone, and I was certain of it. I checked it anyway, looking at the call history, but there was nothing outgoing. I tried to brush it off as some kind of technical error, but something about it just felt off. About 20 minutes later, I was back on the couch watching some reality show when headlights swept across the front windows. The Millers lived on a quiet street that didn't get much traffic, especially after 9, so I got up to look through the blinds. A dark, rusty sedan had parked at the curb directly in front of the house. The car looked out of place in this neighborhood of shiny SUVs and luxury vehicles. A man got out and just stood there on the sidewalk, staring at the house. He wasn't doing anything, just looking. He was maybe in his 40s with dark clothes and a baseball cap pulled low. Even from a distance, I could feel the intensity of his gaze. After what felt like forever but was probably only a minute, he walked back to his car, got in, and drove slowly down the street. The car didn't leave the neighborhood, though. It stopped about 100 yards away, partially hidden among some trees. My heart was pounding. I told myself I was being paranoid, that people park on public streets all the time, that maybe he was lost or waiting for someone. But something in my gut was screaming that this wasn't right. I double-checked all the locks again and pulled the curtains closed on all the windows. I kept the TV on but couldn't focus on it anymore. The next hour or so passed without incident. I kept peeking through the blinds, but the car hadn't moved. Eventually, I convinced myself it was nothing to worry about. I curled up on the couch and must have started dozing off when I heard it, a faint tapping sound. At first, I thought it was part of whatever was playing on TV, but when I muted it, the sound was still there. Tap, 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 like fingernails on glass. It was coming from the back of the house. My whole body went cold. I sat frozen on the couch, straining to listen. Tap, tap, tap. It was definitely real. It was definitely coming from the kitchen door that led to the backyard. I don't know where I found the courage, but I got up and moved quietly toward the kitchen. The tapping got louder as I approached. The kitchen lights were off, but the backyard motion sensor lights had activated, casting an eerie glow through the door's window. And there, framed in the glass panel, was a face. It was the man from the car. He was pressed against the door, one hand cupped around his eyes as he peered inside. When he saw me, he didn't back away. Instead, his expression changed, and he started rattling the doorknob more forcefully. The motion was no longer a tap, it was a violent shake. I stumbled backward, nearly falling over a kitchen chair. The doorknob was rattling harder now, the whole door frame shaking. I could hear him grunting with effort as he tried to force it open. My first instinct was to call 911, but my phone was still on the couch. There was no way I could get to it without passing the kitchen door. Then I remembered Ethan. I couldn't leave him upstairs. I ran up the stairs as quietly as I could, my hand gripping the railing so tight my knuckles turned white. I pushed open Ethan's bedroom door and rushed to his bed. He stirred when I scooped him up. "Jamie?" he mumbled, half asleep. "Shh, it's okay," I whispered, wrapping his blanket around him. "We're just going to play a game, okay?" I carried him downstairs, his head resting on my shoulder. I was halfway down when I heard the sound, plastic and metal breaking, followed by a crash. He'd broken in through the sliding glass door in the dining room, the one I'd checked earlier. I heard footsteps on the tile floor. With Ethan in my arms, I changed direction, heading for the front door instead of the living room. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I saw him. He was standing in the hallway between the dining room and the front entrance, wearing jeans and a dark hoodie. His hair was messy, his face unshaven, and in his right hand was a knife, not a kitchen knife, but something that looked like a hunting knife with a serrated edge. Our eyes met, and for a split second, everything froze. Then he charged toward me. I don't remember consciously making a decision. I just moved. With Ethan clutched tightly against my chest, I rushed to the front door, fumbled with the lock, and yanked it open. The cool night air hit my face as I sprinted down the driveway toward my car. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps pounding on the pavement. I clicked my key fob frantically, the car beeping as it unlocked. I wrenched open the back door and practically threw Ethan inside. "Get down on the floor," I screamed at him, slamming the door shut. I ran around to the driver's side, the man only steps behind me now. I could hear his heavy breathing, almost feel his presence at my back. As I pulled open my door, I felt him grab at my jacket. I twisted away, throwing myself into the driver's seat. The man reached the window just as I slammed the door shut and hit the lock button. His face was pressed against the glass, his eyes wild with rage. He slammed his palm against the window, the knife still clutched in his other hand. I fumbled with my keys, dropping them once before finally getting them into the ignition. The engine roared to life. I slammed the car into reverse and hit the gas, the tires screeching as I backed out. The man had to jump out of the way to avoid being hit. In my rearview mirror, I could see him standing in the middle of the street, watching as I sped away. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. Ethan was crying in the back seat, confused and scared. I pulled over a few blocks away in front of a brightly lit convenience store and called 911 with trembling fingers. 911, what's your emergency? Someone broke into the house. I gasped, my voice breaking. I'm babysitting. There's a man with a knife. He tried to... I don't know what he was trying to do. After giving them the address and a description of the man, I called the Millers. Mrs. Miller answered on the second ring, the sounds of the restaurant audible in the background. Jamie, is everything okay? No, I said, my voice shaking. Someone broke into your house. He had a knife. I have Ethan with me. We're safe, but... I heard her gasp, then muffled sounds as she presumably told her husband, oh my God, where are you? Is Ethan okay? We're at the Quick Stop on Maple. Ethan's fine. The police are on their way to your house. We're coming right now. Don't move. The police arrived at the convenience store minutes before the Millers did. By the time they got there, I was sitting in the back of a police car with Ethan, who had calmed down enough to sip on a juice box an officer had bought him. Mrs. Miller scooped him up, clutching him to her chest, while Mr. Miller stood by, his face pale. The police asked me a lot of questions. I told them everything. The strange call, The car outside, the man breaking in. They sent officers to the Miller's house, but by then the intruder was long gone. The only evidence was the broken sliding door and a muddy footprint on the kitchen floor. In the days that followed, I did some digging on my own. I found out through a mutual friend that Mrs. Miller had been married before to a man named Derek who resembled the intruder I'd seen. They'd had a messy divorce, and there had been a custody battle over Ethan. I heard rumors that Derek had made threats, that he'd violated restraining orders before. I tried to talk to the Millers about it, to understand what had happened that night, but they stopped returning my calls. They hired a new babysitter the following week. When I ran into Mrs. Miller at the grocery store a month later, she was cold, almost dismissive. It was like she didn't want to acknowledge what had happened, or maybe she didn't want to acknowledge my part in it. I never found out for sure if it was her ex-husband who broke in that night. The police never made an arrest, at least not that I heard about. Sometimes I wonder if the Millers knew more than they let on, if there was some reason they didn't want to talk about it. All I know is that I still check my locks twice before going to bed. I still get nervous when I see a rusty sedan, and I will never, ever babysit again. Story 6. I still get chills thinking about what happened at the old Charles Campsall Hospital back in spring 2016. Me and my friends, Jason, Mike, and Trent, were all seniors in high school, counting down the days until graduation. We were into urban exploring and had hit up most of the abandoned buildings around Edmonton. But Campsall was different, always was. For those who don't know, Campsall was this massive tuberculosis sanatorium that operated from 1946 until 1996. The building itself was this imposing concrete structure with these long, narrow wings spreading out from a central block. By 2016, half the place was already demolished, but the main building and east wing were still standing, all wrapped in this rusted chain-link fence with no trespassing signs every few feet. The place had this reputation, you know. Everyone in Edmonton knew someone who'd seen something weird there. There were stories about music playing from nowhere, figures walking through walls, and shadows moving against the light. But what made Campsall truly creepy wasn't just the ghost stories. It was its actual history. My uncle worked maintenance there in the 80s, and he told me things that never made the news. Apparently, in the early days, they did these horrible experiments mostly on First Nations patients: forced sterilizations, experimental vaccines, electroshock therapy for difficult patients. And the worst part? According to my uncle, there were unmarked graves somewhere behind the building. Patients who died during experiments or from neglect, buried quietly to avoid questions. We'd been to Campsall maybe 4 or 5 times before that night. Each time we'd get this weird vibe, cold spots in the middle of rooms, footsteps echoing when we were all standing still, doors closing by themselves. Once, Mike swore he heard someone humming, like an old lady singing to herself coming from an empty corridor. But we were teenage guys, so of course we kept going back, daring each other to explore deeper each time. That night, I think it was April 9th or 10th, felt different from the second we parked. Usually, we'd park about a quarter mile away on this dead-end street and hike through a bit of woods to reach the back of the hospital grounds. It was around 11:30 at night, dark, but with this weird half-moon giving just enough light to see. "Dude, I've got a bad feeling tonight," Trent said as we got out of his car. I remember laughing it off, but truthfully, I felt it too. The air felt heavier somehow, like right before a thunderstorm, except there wasn't a cloud in the sky. "Don't be such a pussy," Mike said, but his voice had this edge to it I'd never heard before. He was scared too. We had our usual gear, flashlights, our phones, a small crowbar to pry open stuck doors inside, and some spray paint because, well, we were stupid teenagers. The plan was the same as always. Hop the fence at the back corner where it was bent down, cross the overgrown field behind the hospital, and slip in through this broken window on the ground floor of the East Wing. Getting over the fence was easy. We'd done it so many times we had a system. One by one, we dropped down onto the property. The field behind the hospital was about 50 yards of waist-high weeds and construction debris. As we crossed it, I remember noticing how quiet it was. Usually there were distant traffic sounds from the highway, maybe some animals rustling in the brush. But that night, nothing. It was like someone had hit mute on the world. When we reached our usual entry point, we got our first surprise. The window, our window that had been broken for years, was freshly boarded up with steel bars. "What the hell?" Jason shined his flashlight over the new bars. "These weren't here last month." Mike tried another window, but it was locked tight. "Looks like they finally decided to seal this place up." We stood there debating what to do for maybe 5 minutes. Part of me was relieved, to be honest. Like I said, something felt off that night. But at the same time, we'd hyped ourselves up for this, and now we were just standing around like idiots. "Let's just go," Trent finally said. "We can try again next weekend, maybe find another way in." No one argued. We turned around and started walking back across the field toward the fence. We were maybe halfway across when it happened. "You know you shouldn't be here." The voice came from directly behind us, not shouting, just conversational, like someone casually commenting on the weather. But it was crystal clear, as if the person was standing inches away. We all froze, then spun around at the same time. There was nobody there. I mean, nobody. The field was completely empty. In the moonlight, we would have seen anyone standing there. There was nowhere to hide, just open field all around us. Jason, Mike, and Trent immediately bolted toward the fence, but I couldn't move. It was like my feet were cemented to the ground. I just stood there staring at the empty space where the voice had come from, trying to make sense of what I'd just heard. Then it came again. "If I were you, I'd run too." The second time, the voice was deeper, almost like it was coming from below me rather than behind me. That broke whatever spell was holding me in place. I ran faster than I've ever run in my life. I didn't even climb the fence properly. I just hurled myself at it, scrambled over the top like some animal, ripping my jeans and scraping my hands on the rusted metal. I hit the ground hard on the other side, but didn't even feel it. I just kept running until I reached Trent's car, where the others were already waiting, all of them breathing hard and looking as terrified as I felt. We sat in the car for a good 10 minutes before anyone could speak. My hands were shaking so bad I couldn't even text. "Did you all hear that?" Mike finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. We all nodded. "There was nobody there," Jason said. "I looked. I fucking looked everywhere." "That's not possible," Trent said. He was gripping the steering wheel so tight his knuckles were white, even though the car wasn't running. Voices don't just come out of nowhere, but it had. We all heard it, clear as day. A voice with no source, no explanation. The drive home was silent. We didn't even put music on. When Trent dropped me off, all he said was, "Let's not talk about this for a while, okay?" I nodded and went inside, where I spent the rest of the night with all the lights on, unable to sleep. The next day, I started researching Campsall more seriously. I found old newspaper articles, blog posts from former staff, even a Reddit thread where people shared experiences similar to ours. And then I found something that made my blood run cold. There was this local historian who'd been documenting the hospital's history, including interviewing former patients and staff. According to several of his sources, the unmarked graves I mentioned earlier, they were supposedly located in the exact spot where we'd heard the voice, the middle of that field behind the hospital. I couldn't stop thinking about it, about that voice, so clear, so close, about how it seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once, about how it knew to tell me to run too, after my friends had already started running. I called Jason later that week, and he told me something he hadn't mentioned that night. When he was running to the fence, he looked back once and swears he saw something. Not a person exactly, but a sort of darkness, deeper than the night around it, moving across the field. Not toward us, just moving, like it was pacing. We never went back to Campsall. About 6 months later, they finally tore down the rest of the building to make way for some new development. I drove by once during the demolition and felt this intense sense of relief seeing those walls coming down, but also this nagging worry. What about those graves? What about whoever or whatever was out there in that field? I've tried to rationalize what happened. Maybe someone was hiding in the grass. Maybe it was some homeless person living on the grounds who wanted to scare us off. Maybe it was the wind playing tricks, or our minds collectively hallucinating due to the power of suggestion. But deep down, I know none of those explanations fit. The voice was too clear, too directed at us specifically, and that field was too open for anyone to hide without us seeing them. It's been over 7 years now, and I still think about it sometimes, especially late at night when I can't sleep. I think about whose graves we might have been standing on. I think about all those patients who suffered and died in that hospital, some of them buried without ceremony, without a marker, without anyone remembering their names. Sometimes I wonder if that voice was a warning or a threat. Was it protecting us by telling us to leave, or would something worse have happened if we'd stayed? I don't know. I don't think I want to know. All I know is that I've never experienced anything like it before or since. I'm not particularly spiritual or religious, but that night at Campsall made me question everything I thought I knew about reality. Because if voices can come from nowhere, what else is possible? What else might be out there, just beyond what we can see or explain? The development they built on the Campsall site is some generic office park now. I drive past it sometimes on my way to work. It looks so normal, so boring. There's nothing to indicate what used to be there or what might still be there underneath the fresh concrete and carefully landscaped lawns. But I never drive past it at night, and I never ever stop. Story 7. I've been working at Oak Ridge Rehabilitation Center for about 3 years now. It's a 30-day program for people battling addiction, drugs, alcohol, whatever demon they're trying to shake. I took the night shift position because it paid better, and I needed the money more than I needed normal sleeping hours. Looking back, I wonder if the extra few bucks per hour was worth what I've experienced. The building itself doesn't look creepy or anything. It's actually pretty nice. Lots of natural light during the day, clean hallways, comfortable community spaces. It used to be a daycare center before they converted it, which is a bit ironic when you think about it. A place that once housed children now houses broken adults trying to piece themselves back together. The first couple of weeks were uneventful. I'd make my rounds, check on patients, fill out paperwork, and watch the clock tick by until morning staff arrived. But then I started noticing something odd whenever I walked down the hallway leading to the male dormitory. It was always the same spot, right by this unmarked door that leads to a storage closet. Every single time I passed that doorway, I'd get this overwhelming feeling that someone was standing just to my right. Not behind me, not in front of me, but right there at my side. I could almost feel them breathing. I'd turn to look, but there was never anybody there. Just an empty hallway. I told myself it was just my imagination. Working overnights messes with your head, especially in a place like this where people are going through withdrawals and having emotional breakdowns at all hours. But the feeling was so consistent, so specific to that one spot, that I couldn't shake the sense that something was off. After a few months, that particular sensation faded. I actually remember thinking, well, at least that weird feeling is gone. But what replaced it was so much worse. It started with offhand comments from the patients. A guy in detox mentioned seeing a man standing in the corner of his room in the middle of the night. When the guy looked directly at the figure, it just disappeared. We get a lot of hallucinations during withdrawal, so I didn't think much of it. But then another patient, completely unrelated to the first, described seeing the exact same thing. A dark figure, watching from the corner, vanishing when acknowledged. The really unsettling part. They both described him wearing this wide-brimmed hat, not like a baseball cap or beanie, but something old-fashioned, almost formal, like something from another era. I remember the chill that ran down my spine when the third patient mentioned the man in the hat without any prompting. This patient had been admitted the day before and couldn't possibly have heard the other patients' stories. Soon staff members were talking about it too. We started calling it the Shadow Man, this dark, silent figure that seemed to be observing everything that happened at Oak Ridge. My co-worker Dana was the first staff member to see it clearly. She was doing her rounds around 2 a.m. when she saw what she described as a pale man peek around the corner of that same hallway with the doorway that always gave me the creeps. She said he looked right at her for a split second before ducking back. When she hurried to check, there was nobody there, and all patients were accounted for in their beds. I've never seen the Shadow Man fully, but I've caught glimpses. Sometimes I'll be sitting at the nurse's station, and in my peripheral vision, I'll see movement outside the windows, a dark shape passing by. When I look up, nothing's there, and it's not like it could be a patient sneaking around outside. We keep the place locked down tight, especially at night. Then there are the doors to the patio area. They're these heavy double doors that require some force to push open. On multiple occasions, I've been sitting nearby when they've suddenly blown open with such violence, it's like someone kicked them with all their strength. The first time it happened, I jumped out of my skin, thinking a patient was trying to escape or something. But when I went to check, there was nobody there, just the empty patio with those doors standing wide open. I've tried to rationalize it. Maybe it's the wind, but these doors are way too heavy for that, and sometimes it happens on completely still nights. Maybe it's a problem with the door mechanism. Maintenance has checked multiple times and found nothing wrong. About 8 months into my time at Oak Ridge, the most disturbing incident happened. I was doing paperwork around 3 a.m, that dead time when the facility is at its quietest. Most patients were asleep, and the few who were awake were in the common area where I could see them. I had this sudden, overwhelming feeling that someone was watching me. Not like the sensation by the doorway. This was more intense, more immediate. I looked up from my papers and saw nothing unusual. But as I turned back to my work, I caught movement in my peripheral vision, near that damn hallway again. I turned quickly and saw what looked like a tall, dark figure standing just at the edge of the hallway. It was mostly hidden, with just a portion visible from where I sat, and on its head was that wide-brimmed hat the patients had described. My blood ran cold. I blinked, and it was gone. I got up immediately and checked the hallway, heart pounding in my chest. Empty. I checked the male dorm, all patients accounted for, most asleep. I checked every room I could access. Nothing. When I returned to the nurses' station, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely fill out the incident report. Not that I actually filed it. What would I write? Saw a shadow man that disappeared. They'd think I was as strung out as some of our patients. The rock garden is what really gets to me, though. It's this area outside where patients paint rocks before they leave the program. It's supposed to be empowering, a physical representation of their recovery journey. Each rock has a name, a date, sometimes a little message of hope. But the reality is much darker. Most of our patients don't make it. They relapse, overdose, disappear back into the lives they were trying to escape. Those colorful stones become less like celebrations and more like gravestones, markers for people who tried and failed to get clean. Sometimes when I look out at that garden, I wonder if the shadow man might be one of them, a former patient who died after leaving, perhaps, still hanging around the last place where he felt hope. Or maybe it's something darker, something that's always been here, watching people at their most vulnerable, feeding off their pain. Last week, something happened that still has me shaken. I was alone on shift with just one other staff member who was handling the women's wing. Around 2:30 in the morning, I heard what sounded like footsteps coming from that hallway. Heavy, deliberate steps. I called out, thinking maybe a patient had gotten up to use the bathroom. No response. I got up to check and felt the temperature drop noticeably as I approached the hallway. The air became so cold I could see my breath clouding in front of me. In June, in a building with controlled climate. The footsteps had stopped, but as I stood there, I heard a sound that made my skin crawl. A low, raspy breathing, like someone with damaged lungs struggling for air. "Hello?" I called out, my voice embarrassingly shaky. "Is someone there?" The breathing stopped abruptly. Then, from the darkness at the end of the hallway, I heard a voice whisper, "They never leave." The voice wasn't loud, but somehow it carried perfectly to where I stood, as if the speaker was right next to my ear. I ran back to the nurses' station and called my coworker, making up some excuse about needing help with a patient. I couldn't bring myself to tell her what had happened. We checked every room, every closet, every possible hiding place. All patients were accounted for, and there was no sign of any intruder. The next day, a patient from the detox unit approached me looking absolutely terrified. Without any prompting, he told me he'd woken up in the middle of the night to see a man in a wide-brimmed hat standing at the foot of his bed. The man had leaned down and whispered, "They never leave." The patient was discharged against medical advice that same day. He said he couldn't stay another night in that room. I've been thinking about quitting, but something keeps me here. Maybe it's a sense of responsibility to the patients. Maybe it's morbid curiosity. Or maybe in some weird way, I feel like I need to understand what's happening here. The shadow man seems to be getting bolder. More patients are reporting sightings. The patio doors open more frequently now. And twice last week, I caught a glimpse of him outside the windows. Not just movement, but a defined figure, standing perfectly still, watching the building. I don't know what he wants or why he's here. All I know is that Oak Ridge isn't just a place where people come to battle their inner demons. Something tells me there are other demons here, waiting and watching. And sometimes, when I'm making my rounds and pass that storage closet doorway, I still feel someone standing just to my right, close enough to touch. Story 8. I've never been one to believe in ghosts. At least that's what I told myself. Back in 2012, when I was 23 and needed a place to live. My childhood friend Sarah and I were both struggling with rent in our separate apartments. So when we found this dirt-cheap cabin in the countryside, it seemed like the perfect solution. Looking back, I should have questioned why the rent was so suspiciously low. The realtor was weirdly eager to get us to sign the lease. He kept emphasizing the historic charm and authentic character while glossing over the obvious issues. The place dated back to the 1700s, originally part of an old tobacco plantation, probably a stable house or something for the workers. The owner had added a kitchen and bathroom sometime in the 80s, thank God, but everything else was basically original. Massive log walls, ancient wooden floors with gaps you could see through, and this weird layout where some rooms didn't even have doors, just open archways carved through 2-foot thick walls. The first night there should have been our warning. Sarah had to work late, so I was alone. I remember standing in the living room after unloading the U-Haul, surrounded by boxes, when this overwhelming feeling washed over me. It wasn't just the typical new place jitters. The cabin felt wrong. Despite it being August and sweltering outside, inside was unnaturally cold and damp like a cellar. I cranked the thermostat to 75 and it barely made a difference. I chalked it up to old insulation and tried to distract myself by unpacking. My bedroom was upstairs in what must have been an attic conversion. Slanted ceilings, one small window, and these massive exposed beams. I remember setting up my bed against the wall, putting fresh sheets on, and feeling proud of myself for being an actual adult with an actual house. That first night, I woke up around 3 a.m. to a scratching sound. Not the quick scurrying of mice that I'd expected in an old cabin. This was a long, deliberate drag, like someone slowly pulling their fingernails across the wall. It started above my head. Then, and this is what really freaked me out, it moved under my bed. I could hear it travel from the wall to under where I was laying, then across the floor to the other side of the room. I froze, hardly breathing. See, the thing is, the construction of this cabin made that impossible. These weren't hollow modern walls. They were solid logs stacked on each other. There was no space for anything to move between the walls and floors like that. Nothing should be able to travel that path. I somehow convinced myself it was just the house settling or some animal that had found a way in. I didn't sleep much the rest of that night, and when morning came, I inspected every inch of my room. No holes, no access points, nothing. After 3 more nights of the same scratching pattern, always starting at 3 a.m., always following the same route, I broke down and moved my mattress to the living room downstairs. I told Sarah it was because the upstairs was too hot, a ridiculous lie given how cold the place was, but I think she knew something was up. About a week later, Sarah mentioned hearing scratching in her room too, but only when she was alone in the house. That's when we finally admitted to each other that something felt off about the place. We started comparing notes. The previous tenant had left some weird stuff behind. All the windows were screwed shut, not just locked, but actually screwed into the frames. The oven was filled with a bizarre mixture of herbs, dirt, and what looked like animal hair wrapped in cloth bundles. We'd cleaned it out thinking it was just gross neglect, but looking back, it seemed more like someone's desperate attempt at protection. Things escalated quickly after that conversation, like whatever was there knew we were onto it. One night, I had this incredibly vivid dream where I woke up in the dream to find this dark shape hovering at the foot of my bed. It wasn't human-shaped, more like a dense shadow that seemed to absorb the darkness around it. In the dream, it moved toward my head, and as it got closer, this intense pressure built in my skull and a high-pitched ringing filled my ears. I jerked awake for real this time, heart pounding, to find my TV turning off. Not just going black, the actual power light dimmed and went out like someone had just pressed the button. But my remote was on the coffee table, and I'd definitely fallen asleep with the TV off. Sarah and I started documenting everything. Windows would open and close by themselves, the same ones we found screwed shut when we moved in. My alarm clock would go off the minute Sarah left for work, no matter what time I set it for. Kitchen drawers would slide open while we were sitting right there. We'd hear banging on the front door, and when we'd answer, no one would be there, not even footprints in the mud outside. The worst was when I was home alone. The scratching would get so loud, I could barely hear myself think. Sometimes it would be accompanied by a low humming, almost like someone singing just below the threshold of hearing. I'd walk into rooms and feel like I'd interrupted something. The air would be disturbed, warmer in one spot, as if someone had just moved out of the way. After about 2 months of this, I'd had enough. One night when Sarah was visiting her parents, the scratching started up, louder than ever. I sat up, flipped on the light, and did something I'd been too scared to do before. I addressed it directly. "I know you're here," I said, my voice shaking embarrassingly. "Whatever you are, you need to leave us alone. This is our home now." The scratching stopped instantly. For a moment, I felt victorious, until the light bulb in my lamp exploded. Not flickered, not burnt out, exploded, sending glass everywhere. I scrambled off my mattress, heart racing, and ran to the kitchen to grab a flashlight. As I stood there in the dark, I heard something new. Footsteps upstairs, heavy and slow, pacing back and forth directly above me. The thing is, there was no way to access the space above the kitchen. The upstairs layout didn't extend over this part of the house. There shouldn't have been a floor there at all, just the underside of the roof. I spent the rest of that night in my car. Sarah and I seriously considered breaking our lease, but we were both broke, and finding a new place would have been impossible. So we adapted. We started leaving lights on constantly. We bought an expensive electric heater to combat the perpetual cold. We played music or kept the TV running to drown out the scratching. We never, ever acknowledged the presence out loud again after my outburst. Strangely enough, something shifted as the months went by. The activity didn't stop, but it changed. The scratching became less threatening, more like a familiar household sound. The footsteps upstairs seemed to follow a protective pattern, especially when one of us was home alone. Windows still opened, but usually when the house was stuffy. The alarm clock still went off, but gradually shifted to more reasonable hours. About a year in, Sarah and I started dating, which was unexpected but felt right. We'd gone from being childhood friends to roommates dealing with a possible haunting to something more. As our relationship grew stronger, the cabin felt less menacing. The cold spots remained, but they became predictable, easy to avoid or plan around. The scratching continued but faded into the background, like the ticking of a clock you eventually stop noticing. By our second year there, we'd gotten engaged. Sarah's parents helped us renovate parts of the cabin, and something remarkable happened during that process. As we improved the space, giving it care and attention, the atmosphere transformed. Rooms that had felt oppressive became cozy. The perpetual dampness receded. We eventually moved out after 3 years, not because of the haunting, but because we found jobs in the city. Sarah's parents actually took over the lease, falling in love with the cabin's rustic charm. The strangest part? They never experienced a single unusual event. When we visit them now, the cabin feels warm, cute, and homely. Nothing like the dark, oppressive space we first moved into. Sometimes I wonder if whatever was there wasn't trying to scare us away permanently, but was more like a spiritual nanny of sorts. Something that watched over us as we matured from irresponsible early 20s kids into actual adults. Once we'd grown up and found each other, it simply wasn't needed anymore. I still get chills thinking about those first few months, though. That scratching sound has been permanently etched into my memory. Just last week, I woke up at 3 a.m. in our city apartment to what sounded like scratching on the wall. Sarah was sound asleep beside me. I held my breath, listening, but it was just the radiator knocking. At least that's what I tell myself, because sometimes I swear I can feel it watching from the corner of the room, checking in on us, making sure we're still growing up right. Story 9. I still can't sleep right when I remember that night. It's been 3 months, but every time I close my eyes, I see those headlights in our rearview mirror and those faces. I've never told this story publicly before, but I need to get it out. Maybe writing it down will help me process what happened. My family was driving back from visiting my wife's parents in Wiekilpan. It was supposed to be a straightforward 2-hour drive to Morelia, where we live. My wife Isabel was in the passenger seat beside me, while our kids, Maria, 15, and Ivan, 12, were in the back. We'd left later than planned because my father-in-law kept insisting we stay for just one more coffee, the way he always does. By the time we hit the road, it was already dark, really dark. One of those nights where the moon is completely absent and the stars are covered by clouds. The highway connecting these towns isn't like the big highways in tourist areas. It's mostly a 2-lane road that winds through hills and mountains with these blind curves that always make me nervous, especially at night. I'm a doctor at the regional hospital in Morelia. Everyone just calls me Doc, even my kids sometimes, and I've seen enough accident victims to be extra cautious on these roads. I was driving about 70 kilometers per hour, which is reasonable given the conditions. The road was nearly empty that night, which I was grateful for at first. We were about 45 minutes into our journey when I first noticed the headlights behind us. They appeared suddenly around a curve and were unusually bright, the kind that blind you completely when they hit your mirrors. I adjusted my rearview mirror to avoid the glare, but they kept getting closer, fast. "Someone's in a hurry," Isabel commented, turning to look back. I could feel the vehicle getting closer and closer, their engine roaring loudly in the quiet night. It was an older model Ford Maverick, dark-colored. Couldn't tell exactly what color in the darkness. Before I could even consider pulling over to let them pass, they swerved into the oncoming lane on a blind curve and accelerated alongside us. "Papa, they're going to hit us!" Maria shouted from the back seat. I had to jerk the wheel sharply to the right to avoid being sideswiped. Our tires hit the gravel shoulder, and I felt the car fishtail slightly before I regained control. My heart was already hammering in my chest. "What's wrong with them?" Isabel gasped, clutching the dashboard. The Maverick pulled ahead of us, and for a moment I thought they were just some idiotic drunk drivers in a hurry. But then they slowed down deliberately, forcing me to brake. When I tried to pass them, they swerved to block me. That's when I realized this wasn't road rage or reckless driving. These people were targeting us specifically. I checked the GPS on my phone. The next town was still 30 kilometers away, a tiny dot of light on the horizon. Cell reception out here was spotty at best. We were essentially alone with whoever these people were. "Doc, what's happening?" Isabel's voice trembled as she reached back to touch the kids' knees, a protective gesture she's had since they were little. "I don't know," I answered honestly, my mouth dry. "But I need you all to stay calm and put your seatbelts on tighter." The Maverick slowed even more, nearly coming to a stop in the middle of the highway. I considered trying to pass them again, but the road was too narrow, and they'd already shown they would swerve to hit us. My options were limited: stop behind them, which seemed like the worst idea, try to turn around, dangerous on this narrow road, or somehow get past them. "Can you see who they are?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady for the kids. Maria leaned forward between the front seats. "There are 4 of them, I think, all men." As we crept forward, maintaining some distance behind them, the passenger in the Maverick stuck his arm out the window and waved us forward like he was inviting us to pass. "Don't," Isabel whispered, grabbing my arm. I didn't need the warning. This was clearly a trap. Suddenly, the Maverick's reverse lights came on. They were backing up toward us. I slammed on the brakes and shifted into reverse myself, backing up as quickly as I dared on the dark highway. "They're crazy!" Ivan cried from the back seat. He'd been quiet until now, and I could hear the fear breaking his voice. I managed to back up about 50 meters before I found a slightly wider section of shoulder. In a split-second decision, I cranked the wheel hard, hit the gas, and pulled a rapid 3-point turn. As soon as we were facing the other direction, I floored it. The headlights of the Maverick filled our rear window as they quickly turned around to follow us. Our small family sedan was no match for their engine, and they closed the gap within seconds. "They're coming!" Isabel screamed, looking back. The Maverick rammed us from behind. The impact jerked us all forward against our seatbelts. Ivan started crying. Maria was holding onto her brother, her face pale in the dim light of the dashboard. "Call emergency services," I told Isabel, tossing her my phone while trying to keep the car steady after the impact. She tried, her fingers shaking as she dialed. "No signal," she said, her voice breaking. The Maverick pulled alongside us again, and this time I could see the faces through the windows. 4 men, just as Maria had said. The driver had this horrible grin on his face. Not drunk, not angry, but enjoying himself. The passenger closest to us rolled down his window and shouted something I couldn't hear over the roaring engines. What I did see clearly was the glint of something metal in his hand. "Get down!" I shouted to everyone. "Stay below the windows." Isabel pulled herself down while reaching back to push the kids lower in their seats. Maria was crying now too, but quietly, trying to comfort Ivan at the same time. The Maverick swerved toward us, trying to force us off the road. I held the wheel with all my strength, fighting to keep us on the pavement. If we went off the road at this speed, we'd roll for sure. The drop-off on this particular stretch wasn't steep, but it was enough to be fatal. My mind was racing. These weren't just aggressive drivers. They weren't trying to rob us. They would have just blocked the road completely if that was the case. No, they were playing with us, hunting us. I'm not a religious man, but I started praying then, praying for my family, for some passing truck or police patrol, for anything. As we rounded another curve, I saw headlights in the distance coming toward us. Relief flooded through me until I realized the Maverick wasn't backing off. If anything, They became more aggressive, determined to run us off the road before we reached potential help. The oncoming vehicle was still at least a kilometer away. We wouldn't make it in time at this rate. In desperation, I did something I'd never normally do. When the Maverick swerved at us again, instead of veering away, I jerked the wheel toward them. Isabel screamed, the kids screamed. I might have been screaming too, but my gamble worked. The Maverick's driver hadn't expected me to swerve toward him. He overcorrected, his right wheels catching the gravel shoulder. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought he would lose control completely, but he managed to straighten out. Those few seconds gave me just enough advantage. I floored the accelerator again, pushing our car beyond what I thought it could do. The engine whined in protest, but we pulled ahead. "They're still coming," Maria said, looking back. "But they're farther behind now." The approaching vehicle turned out to be a large semi-truck. I flashed my lights frantically as we passed each other, hoping the truck driver would understand something was wrong. Whether he did or not, his massive presence on the road forced the Maverick to fall back even further. But they didn't give up. Even with the distance between us, I could see their headlights closing in again. My hands were sweating so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. My right leg was cramping from pressing the accelerator so hard for so long. "There's a turnoff coming up," Isabel said, pointing at a sign. "It goes to San Juan. There might be people there." I took the turn without slowing down enough, and our car skidded, the tires squealing. Behind us, the Maverick took the turn even faster, almost going off the road, but somehow managing to stay on our tail. The road to San Juan was narrower and even more winding than the highway, but there were a few houses scattered along it now, lights in windows, signs of life. I honked continuously as we sped past, hoping someone would hear, would call for help. We came around a sharp bend, and suddenly there were lights ahead, the small center of San Juan, a few buildings, a tiny plaza, and miracle of miracles, a local police truck parked in front of what looked like a small store. The Maverick must have seen it too, because their headlights suddenly dropped back. As we screeched into the plaza, honking and flashing our lights, I watched in the rearview mirror as the Maverick made a sharp U-turn and disappeared back the way we'd come. I pulled up right next to the police truck, where two officers were now standing, hands on their holsters, looking confused at our dramatic arrival. Everything after that is a blur, explaining to the officers what happened, their skeptical looks turning serious when they saw our damaged rear bumper and the genuine terror on our faces. Ivan throwing up from the stress, Maria sobbing uncontrollably now that we were safe. Isabel's hands shaking so badly she couldn't hold the cup of water someone brought her. The officers said they'd patrol the roads, but didn't sound hopeful about catching anyone. "Probably just drunk kids," one suggested, though he didn't sound convinced either. We filed a police report in Morelia the next day, but nothing ever came of it. No suspects identified, no similar incidents reported. Just us, with our dented car and our nightmares. I've gone over it 1,000 times in my head. Why us? Was it random? Did they follow us from Huiquilpan? Were they waiting on that stretch of road for any vulnerable family? The worst part is not knowing. Not knowing who they were or why they chose us. Not knowing if they're still out there on that same dark stretch of highway, looking for their next victims. I avoid driving at night now. We all do. Maria has started seeing a therapist for anxiety. Ivan sleeps in our room most nights. Isabel keeps checking the locks on our doors and windows. And me? I keep seeing those faces in the Maverick. That driver's grin. That wasn't road rage. That wasn't robbery. That was pure predatory pleasure. the look of someone who enjoys terrorizing others. I don't know if writing this down has helped me, but maybe it will help someone else. If you're driving on a dark, isolated road and see headlights coming up too fast behind you, don't assume it's just someone in a hurry. Don't stop. Find other people, find lights, find safety. Because sometimes the real monsters aren't hiding in the darkness beside the road. Sometimes they're behind the wheel and they're hunting. Story 10. I've never shared this with anyone outside my family. Even now, my hands are shaking as I type this out. I guess I need to tell someone who might actually believe me, because whenever I've tried to explain what happened, people just think I'm making it up or exaggerating. But I swear on everything I hold dear, what happened at Willow Lake was real. Our family has this cabin that my grandfather built back in the 1970s. It's nothing fancy, just a simple 2-bedroom place with a small kitchen and living area. The real appeal was always its location on Willow Lake, about 3 hours north of where we lived. We're talking seriously remote, no neighbors for miles, spotty cell service at best, and surrounded by dense forest. As kids, we loved it. It was our summer tradition to spend 2 weeks there every July, swimming, fishing, hiking, and disconnecting from everything. There were 4 of us, my parents, me, and my 2 younger sisters, Ellie and Megan. I was 17 that summer, Ellie was 15, and Megan had just turned 13. This was back in 2011, the last summer we ever went to Willow Lake. The first few days were perfect. The weather was warm but not too hot, and we fell into our usual routine pretty quickly. Dad would fish in the mornings, Mom would read on the porch, and us kids would explore or swim. The cabin didn't have internet or TV, just some board games and books. Looking back, those simple days were the last normal moments we had there. It happened on our 5th day. The morning was misty, not unusual for the lake. That soft, cotton-like fog that hangs over the water until the sun burns it off. Ellie and Megan wanted to take the inner tubes out. I'd stayed up late the night before reading, so I was still asleep when they headed down to the dock around 8 in the morning. I woke up to screaming. Not playful screaming, but the kind that makes your blood run cold. I bolted out of bed and ran to the front porch in my pajamas. Mom and Dad were already rushing down the path toward the dock where my sisters were frantically paddling back to shore, still screaming. By the time I reached them, they were hysterical. Both of them were soaking wet, shivering despite the warm morning. Ellie couldn't even speak. She just kept pointing across the lake while Megan buried her face in Mom's shoulder, sobbing uncontrollably. "Something's over there," Ellie finally managed to say, "on the other side of the lake." Dad grabbed the binoculars we kept for bird watching and scanned the opposite shore. The mist was still heavy, but the sun was starting to break through. "I don't see anything," he said, but his voice had this edge to it I'd never heard before. When we finally calmed them down enough to explain, what they described made no sense. They said they'd been floating about 20 yards offshore when the mist cleared a bit on the far side of the lake. That's when they spotted something moving at the edge of the trees. At first, they thought it was a dog, something pale, bone white. But then it stood up. "It stood on its back legs," Megan said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But not like a person, all wrong, jerky, like it wasn't used to standing that way." Ellie nodded, her eyes wide. "It was tall, taller than Dad, and skinny, so skinny, and it just stood there, watching us." "Its face," Megan continued, and then she started crying again. "It didn't have eyes, just these black holes, deep, empty sockets. And then it looked right at us. I know it didn't have eyes, but I swear it was looking right at us. Then it dropped down on all fours again and ran into the trees, Ellie finished. But not like a dog or a deer. More like, I don't know, like something pretending to be an animal. Dad tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a deer infected with something, or a bear that looked strange in the mist. Mom suggested it could have been someone playing a prank, though we all knew there wasn't anyone else around for miles. I didn't know what to think. My sisters weren't the type to make up stories or get freaked out over nothing. Whatever they saw, they truly believed it was real. We spent the rest of the day close to the cabin. Dad kept his hunting rifle nearby, which he'd never done before. None of us mentioned it, but we all noticed. That night we played board games and tried to act normal, but there was this tension hanging in the air. Every unexpected noise made us jump. I kept catching my parents exchanging worried glances when they thought we weren't looking. The next few days, we tried to convince ourselves nothing had happened. We didn't go out on the lake again, but we did short hikes close to the cabin and had campfires in the evening. My sisters seemed to be doing better, though Ellie would sometimes stop mid-conversation and stare out toward the lake with this haunted expression. On our 9th night at the cabin, we decided to sleep in the large tent we'd set up in the yard. It was something we did every year, one night under the stars as a family. In hindsight, I don't know why we went through with it that year. Maybe we were trying too hard to pretend everything was normal. We had the tent about 30 yards from the cabin, in a small clearing surrounded by pine trees. After roasting marshmallows and telling tame ghost stories, carefully avoiding anything too scary, we all settled into our sleeping bags around 11 at night. Dad had brought a couple of beers, and he was sitting up, sipping the last one while the rest of us were drifting off to sleep. I'm not sure what time it was when I woke up. The fire had died completely, and the only light came from the quarter moon overhead. Something had jolted me awake. Not a sound exactly, but a feeling. That prickling sensation on the back of your neck when you know you're being watched. Everyone else was still asleep. I lay there, straining my ears, trying to figure out what had woken me. The forest was completely, unnaturally silent. No insects, no night birds, no rustling leaves, just absolute stillness. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Soft, careful footsteps on the pine needles outside our tent. They were moving slowly, circling the tent. At first, I thought it might be an animal, maybe a raccoon or even a deer. But there was something deliberate about the pace. Methodical. I reached over and shook Dad's shoulder. He woke immediately, his hand automatically reaching for the rifle he'd placed next to his sleeping bag. He motioned for me to be quiet, then sat up slowly, listening. The footsteps stopped. The silence returned, heavier than before. Then, from directly outside the tent wall by my head, came a sound that still haunts me. A low, rumbling growl. Not like a dog or a wolf or any animal I've ever heard. It was deeper, with this weird clicking quality underneath it, like someone rapidly tapping teeth together. Dad's face went completely white. He grabbed his flashlight and the rifle, and in one quick motion, he unzipped the tent and pointed both outside. The beam swept across the clearing, but there was nothing there, just empty darkness. By now, Mom and my sisters were awake too. Megan started crying quietly, and Ellie was frozen in her sleeping bag, eyes wide with terror. Probably just a coyote, Dad said, but his voice shook. Everyone stay close. He reached for his beer bottle, the last one he'd been drinking before falling asleep. In one swift movement, he hurled it into the darkness toward where the growl had come from. we heard it shatter against a tree. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then something hit the tent, hard. A sharp object tore through the fabric and landed with a thud between our sleeping bags. Megan screamed. It was a shard of glass from Dad's beer bottle. Someone or something had thrown it back at us, and not just randomly. The piece had sliced right through Ellie's arm as it came in, leaving a deep cut that immediately started bleeding. Mom scrambled to wrap Ellie's arm with a t-shirt, while Dad pointed the rifle at the tear in the tent, his hands visibly shaking. "Who's out there?" he shouted. "We're armed." No response, just that horrible, heavy silence. Then the footsteps started again. Not slow and careful this time, but faster, circling the tent, around and around, picking up speed. We could feel the ground vibrating slightly with each step. "It's just one person," Dad whispered, trying to reassure us. "Just some sicko trying to scare us." But the footsteps kept accelerating until they were moving so fast that whatever was circling our tent couldn't possibly be human. No person could move that quickly or tirelessly, around and around and around for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The sound of it, that rhythmic thudding against the earth, seemed to fill the entire forest. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The silence returned, but somehow worse than before. We huddled together in the middle of the tent, Dad pointing his rifle at the entrance, Mom holding a sobbing Megan, me pressing the t-shirt against Ellie's bleeding arm. None of us dared to move or speak. Outside, something was breathing. Heavy, wet breaths, like an animal after a long chase. It was right outside the entrance to our tent. The thin, fabric wall bulged slightly inward, as if something was pressing against it gently. I will never forget what happened next. A shape appeared against the tent wall, the silhouette of a hand, but wrong. The fingers were too long, too thin, and there seemed to be too many joints. It pressed against the fabric for just a moment, then withdrew. The zipper of our tent, the one Dad had hastily closed after looking outside, began to move. Slowly, inch by inch, it started to open from the outside. Dad fired a warning shot into the air through the tear in the tent. The sound was deafening in the quiet night. The zipper stopped moving. We sat there, paralyzed with fear, waiting for whatever would happen next. Nothing did. The presence outside seemed to have vanished. We stayed awake the rest of the night, jumping at every sound, clutching each other. Dad kept the rifle ready, and none of us even considered leaving the relative safety of the tent. Ellie's arm eventually stopped bleeding, but the cut was deep. She'd need stitches. As the first light of dawn filtered through the trees, we finally worked up the courage to look outside. Dad went first, rifle raised, then signaled for us to follow. The clearing around our tent was untouched. No footprints, no signs of disturbance in the pine needles covering the ground. The only evidence that anything had happened was the shard of glass with Ellie's blood on it, the tear in our tent, and the empty beer bottle nowhere to be found. We packed up and left Willow Lake that morning. Ellie got 12 stitches at the emergency room in the nearest town. We told the doctor she fell while carrying a glass bottle. I don't think he believed us, but he didn't ask questions. We never went back to the cabin. Dad listed it for sale the following month, but it sat on the market for years before finally selling for much less than it was worth. We never talked about what happened, not really. Even among ourselves, we'd only reference it vaguely as that night at the lake. It's been 12 years. Ellie still has the scar on her arm. Sometimes I catch her tracing it with her finger, this distant look in her eyes. Megan went through therapy for anxiety in college, though she never told her therapist the real source of her fears. As for me, I still can't shake the feeling that whatever was outside our tent that night is still out there somewhere. And sometimes, when I'm alone in the woods, or even just in my backyard on a particularly quiet night, I find myself listening for footsteps circling in the darkness. Story 11. I still can't sleep properly. It's been 3 months since that night, but every time I hear any metal-on-metal sound, my whole body goes rigid. I've tried therapy twice a week, installed a security system that would make Fort Knox jealous, but nothing helps. I need to get this out somewhere, so here goes. My name's not important, but I'm 34 and live in what used to be considered a nice neighborhood, Oak Ridge Estates, where the lawns are all perfectly cut and everyone waves but nobody really talks to each other. Classic suburban America. I'd been living here about 3 years when Sarah left me. 5 years together, and she just walked away. Said we'd grown apart. Maybe we had. I was too numb to argue. After the breakup, my life became this gray blur of work, takeout, and whatever mindless crap I could find on streaming services. I'd go days barely speaking to anyone except checkout clerks and delivery drivers. My house felt too big, too empty. 2 stories, 3 bedrooms, all the space we'd planned to fill with a future that wasn't happening anymore. This particular Saturday night was nothing special. Mid-October, already dark by 6, and I was upstairs in my bedroom watching some low-budget horror movie I'd found in the depths of Netflix. It was awful. Bad acting, worse special effects, but it was noise. Around 9 p.m., I started hearing this weird clanging sound. At first, I thought it was part of the movie. The sound mixing was terrible anyway. It was this distinct metallic ping, 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 almost rhythmic. I kept watching for another few minutes until I needed to use the bathroom. I hit pause, but the clanging continued. That's when my stomach first tightened. The sound wasn't coming from my laptop. It was coming from somewhere else. I sat there frozen for a moment, just listening. Ping, 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 steady, deliberate. It wasn't pipes or the furnace. This sounded intentional. My first thought was maybe some neighbor kids playing a prank. It wouldn't be the first time the Thompson boys from down the street had messed with people's yards. I got up and checked my front bedroom window first. Nothing. Then I moved to the side window that overlooks my backyard and the deck. That's when I saw it. There was a kid standing on my back lawn, just standing there, hitting what looked like a white PVC pipe against one of my metal deck chairs. Ping, ping, ping. In the darkness, I could only make out that it was small, maybe 8 or 9 years old, wearing what looked like a dark hoodie. The sight was so bizarre, so out of place, that my first reaction wasn't even fear, it was confusion. Why would a child be in my backyard alone at 9 at night, hitting my furniture with a pipe? It didn't make sense. But as I stood there watching, something primitive in my brain started screaming that something was very, very wrong. The kid never looked up, just kept making that noise, methodically, like it was a job they'd been assigned. I thought maybe they were lost or in trouble. Despite everything in me saying not to, I decided I should at least check if they needed help. I went downstairs, my heart beating faster with each step. I flipped on my back porch light, illuminating part of the yard. The kid stopped hitting the chair and just stood there, still not looking at the house, just waiting. I approached my back door, keys in one hand. I don't know why, habit, I guess, and reached for the door handle with the other. Something made me pause. Call it instinct, call it luck, call it whatever saved my life that night. Instead of opening the door, I moved to the narrow side window next to it and peered out, trying to get a better view of the kid. That's when I saw them. Two men crouched below my deck, pressed against the house on either side of my door, completely hidden from view unless you looked from this specific angle. They wore dark clothes and what looked like ski masks. They were waiting for me to open the door. My blood turned to ice. I stumbled back, knocking over a side table. The crash must have alerted them that something was wrong, because suddenly one of the men's faces appeared in the window. Our eyes met for a split second. His were dark, emotionless. I'll never forget that look. Then all hell broke loose. The back door handle started jiggling violently. Then came the first slam against the door. They were trying to break it down. I ran to my front door to make sure it was locked, then upstairs to my bedroom to grab my phone. I could hear the back door splintering as I dialed 911 with shaking fingers. 911, what's your emergency? I was hyperventilating so badly I could barely speak. Someone's breaking into my house. There are men. They're using a child as bait. They're breaking in right now. I gave my address between gasps, and the dispatcher told me to find a safe place to hide until officers arrived. I locked myself in the upstairs bathroom. It had no windows and a solid door. I climbed into the bathtub, pressing myself against the cold porcelain as I heard them enter my house. Heavy footsteps pounded up the stairs. I could hear them checking rooms, opening closets. They weren't even trying to be quiet anymore. When they tried the bathroom door and found it locked, the pounding started. "We know you're in there," one of them growled. His voice was deep with an accent I couldn't place. "Open the door and you won't get hurt." I wasn't stupid enough to believe that. I yelled back that I'd called the police, that they were on their way. There was a pause, then a hushed conversation I couldn't make out. Then the kicking started. 1, 2, 3 heavy blows against the door. The frame was starting to splinter when I heard sirens in the distance. Never has that sound been more beautiful. The kicking stopped. More hurried conversation, then footsteps thundering back down the stairs. I heard my back door slam, then silence. I stayed in that bathtub, phone clutched to my chest, until I heard police officers calling out from downstairs. Even then, I was so terrified I made them slide their badges under the bathroom door before I would come out. 4 officers had responded. They searched my house completely, then the yard and surrounding area. The men were gone. The child was gone. All that remained was my broken back door and the PVC pipe lying on the lawn. The police took my statement, asked if anything was missing. Nothing was. They hadn't had time to steal anything. And if I had any enemies, I don't. They were disturbed by the whole scenario, especially the use of a child. One officer told me he'd seen similar schemes before. Criminals using children, women in distress, or even injured animals to lure good Samaritans into opening their doors. "You're lucky you had that instinct to check first," he said. "Most people would have just opened the door." They increased patrols in my neighborhood for the next few weeks, but they never caught the men, never identified the child. The investigation stalled with no leads. I couldn't stay in my house after that. I slept on a friend's couch for 2 weeks before forcing myself to return, and only after installing security cameras, motion sensor lights, and a new reinforced door. I got a dog too, a big German shepherd named Rex who sleeps at the foot of my bed every night. But nothing erases what happened. Nothing erases the knowledge that they used a child as bait. Was the kid a relative of theirs? A kidnapping victim? Just some neighborhood kid they paid or threatened? I'll never know. And that's almost as haunting as the memory of those eyes in the window. The responding officers told me they believed it was a planned home invasion. They'd probably been watching me, knew I lived alone, knew my routines. They might have targeted me because I was isolated, depressed, not paying attention to my surroundings. I keep thinking about what would have happened if I'd opened that door. I would have stepped outside, concerned about a child alone in the dark, and those men would have, well, best case scenario, they would have just robbed me. Worst case, I wouldn't be here writing this. Sometimes I still hear that clanging in my dreams. Ping, ping, ping. A child's silhouette in the darkness, waiting, luring. I wake up sweating, convinced there's someone in my yard. I don't know if I'll ever feel safe again. I still live in the same house, but I'm putting it on the market next month. I can't stay here. Every time the wind knocks something over in the yard, I'm back in that moment, peering through the window, seeing those men waiting to ambush me. The worst part is wondering about that kid. Where are they now? Are they okay? Were they forced to participate? Or do they even understand what they were part of? Sometimes I picture them standing in someone else's yard, tapping on a chair, waiting for another victim to come outside. So that's my warning to anyone reading this. If you hear something strange outside your home, if you see someone who seems out of place, a child alone, someone who looks in distress, call the police first. Don't open your door. Don't be the good Samaritan. It might cost you everything. I still can't explain exactly what stopped me from opening that door that night. Some primal instinct, some gut feeling. Whatever it was, it saved my life. Trust your instincts. They know danger before your conscious mind does. And if you ever hear a strange metallic clanging outside your home late at night, turn on every light, call the police, and whatever you do, don't open the door. Story 12. I've been trying to make sense of what happened to us that night for nearly 2 weeks now. My hands still shake when I think about it, but I need to get this out of my system. Writing it down might help, I don't know. Maybe someone out there has experienced something similar and can tell me I'm not going crazy. It all started when my friends Carlos and Miguel were staying over at my place last month. We live in this small town in northern Mexico that's surrounded by prairie lands, mostly empty except for a few old abandoned properties scattered around. We were bored out of our minds that Saturday, just playing video games and complaining about how nothing ever happens here. That's when Carlos mentioned the old Hacienda Marquez. You guys know about that burned out place beyond the Twin Lakes, right? He asked, scrolling through his phone. My cousin says there's all kinds of weird stuff happening out there. I'd heard rumors about it since I was a kid. The hacienda had burned down in the 80s, and locals always talked about strange lights and sounds coming from the ruins. Some people claimed they'd seen shadow figures moving around the property at night. The kind of local legend every small town has. Miguel immediately perked up. We should go check it out. I wasn't so sure. It's already getting late, I said, glancing at my phone. It was almost 6 in the evening. Plus, it's at least an hour's walk from here. But Carlos and Miguel were already grabbing their jackets and backpacks, excited about finally doing something interesting. I reluctantly agreed, thinking it would just be another boring walk that would end with us getting tired and turning back. God, I wish I'd stuck to my gut feeling. We left my house around 7. The sun was still up but beginning to set, painting the sky in oranges and reds. The walk was pleasant enough at first. We followed the dirt road that led out of town, joking around and talking about random stuff. Carlos had brought a few beers, and Miguel was filming everything on his phone, narrating like we were on some ghost hunting show. Day 1 of our paranormal investigation, he announced dramatically into his phone camera. "We're about to uncover the secrets of Hacienda Marquez." I remember rolling my eyes but laughing along. It all felt like a game then. The landscape changed as we walked further from town. The houses became more spread out until they disappeared entirely, replaced by flat prairie land dotted with scraggly bushes and the occasional tree. In the distance, we could see the twin lakes, two small bodies of water that looked almost black in the fading light. "It's just beyond those lakes," Carlos said, pointing ahead. "My cousin says the hacienda is up on that small hill." By the time we reached the first lake, the sun had fully set. The temperature dropped quickly, and I zipped up my jacket, already regretting not bringing a flashlight. Miguel and Carlos had their phone lights, which seemed bright enough at the time. We followed the narrow path between the two lakes. The water was completely still, reflecting the stars that had begun to appear above. In another context, it might have been beautiful. Instead, I remember feeling increasingly uneasy, like someone was watching us. "Guys, do you feel that?" I asked, stopping for a moment. "Feel what?" Miguel was still filming everything. "I don't know, just something doesn't feel right." Carlos laughed, but it sounded forced. "Don't be such a baby. It's just an old burned-down house." We continued walking, but our joking had stopped. The only sounds were our footsteps on the dry ground and the occasional call of a night bird. The path began to slope upward as we approached the small hill where the hacienda stood. And then we saw it. The Hacienda Marquez was more intact than I expected. The main structure was still standing, though half of it had clearly been gutted by fire. In the darkness, it looked like a black skeleton against the night sky. As we got closer, our phone lights revealed graffiti covering the exterior walls. Some of it just names and crude drawings, but some were strange symbols that looked like pentagrams and other occult signs. "Holy shit," Miguel whispered, zooming in with his camera. "Look at all that satanic stuff." "Probably just local teens trying to be edgy," Carlos said, but his voice had lost its confidence. We stood about 50 feet from the main entrance, suddenly hesitant to go any further. That's when I noticed it, a figure standing on the far side of the property, maybe 200 meters away. "Hey guys," I said quietly, pointing. "Someone's over there." Miguel aimed his phone light in that direction, but it barely penetrated the darkness that far. All we could make out was a tall, thin silhouette, completely motionless. "Hello?" Carlos called out, his voice echoing across the empty space. The figure didn't move or respond. "It's probably just a post or something," Miguel suggested, but he didn't sound convinced. We stood there for several long seconds, staring at the figure. I was about to suggest we head back to town when Carlos suddenly grabbed my arm, his fingers digging painfully into my skin. "It's gone," he hissed. I blinked and looked again. The space where the figure had been standing was empty. "Maybe it walked away," I said, even though none of us had seen it move. That's when Miguel's phone light caught something behind us. We all turned at once. I'll never forget what I saw in that moment. Standing no more than 20 feet behind us was the figure, a tall, unnaturally thin humanoid shape that had to be at least 6'3". It was dark, almost like a shadow given form, but solid enough that Miguel's phone light didn't pass through it. "How the fuck did it get behind us?" Carlos whispered. We had been facing the direction of the figure the entire time. For it to be behind us now, it would have had to circle around completely, and do it without making a sound, across open ground where we should have easily seen it moving. But it hadn't. It had simply appeared. For a moment, none of us moved. The figure didn't either. It just stood there, still as a statue. I couldn't make out any features. No face, no clothing details, just a human-shaped silhouette. Then Miguel broke the spell. "We need to go. Now." We turned and ran. I've never been much of an athlete, and I have a minor heart condition that makes intense physical activity difficult. But in that moment, pure adrenaline took over. We sprinted down the hill, away from the hacienda, back toward the lakes. I made the mistake of looking over my shoulder as we ran. The figure was following us, but not running like a normal person would. It moved in jerky, unnaturally fast bursts, covering ground in a way that defied everything I knew about how bodies are supposed to move. "Don't look back!" Carlos shouted, grabbing my arm and pulling me forward. My lungs were burning by the time we reached the path between the lakes. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might give out. We paused for just a moment to catch our breath, and that's when we saw it again. The figure had stopped at the top of the hill, silhouetted against the night sky. As we watched in horror, it began to change. Its already thin frame seemed to elongate even more, then bent forward at an impossible angle. Its limbs rearranged themselves until it was no longer standing upright, but positioned on all fours. "What the fuck is happening?" Miguel's voice was barely audible, strangled by fear. The transformed figure began moving down the hill toward us, no longer jerky but fluid, like some kind of animal. It was faster now. We ran again, harder than before. The path between the lakes felt endless. I stumbled twice, each time certain that whatever was behind us would catch me, but somehow I managed to keep going. My vision was starting to blur at the edges, partly from tears of terror, partly from my heart condition making it hard to get enough oxygen. When we finally cleared the second lake and saw the distant lights of town, I nearly collapsed with relief. But we didn't slow down. We kept running until we reached the first houses of the residential area, screaming for help. A security guard from one of the gated communities heard us and came running. He found 3 grown men crying and babbling incoherently about something chasing us. I'm sure he thought we were drunk or high, but he was kind enough to escort us back to my house anyway. We spent the rest of the night locked inside, jumping at every sound. None of us slept. When Miguel checked his phone the next morning, every video he'd taken after we reached the hacienda was corrupted, just static and garbled audio. That was 12 days ago. Carlos and Miguel went back to their own homes the next day, but we've talked almost daily since then. They're experiencing the same thing I am, a constant feeling of being watched. I've caught glimpses of tall, thin shadows at the edge of my vision. When I turn to look directly, there's nothing there, but I know something is. I've tried researching local legends about the hacienda, looking for anything that might explain what we saw, but there's not much information available. Just vague stories about the place being cursed after the fire killed several people. I don't know what we encountered that night. I don't know if it was some kind of animal that just looked human-like in the darkness, or if it was something else, something that shouldn't exist. All I know is that I can't shake the image of that figure transforming, dropping to all fours, and coming after us. I haven't been sleeping well. When I do sleep, I dream of running, always running, with something just behind me that I can't quite escape. I wake up with my heart racing, convinced that if I look at my bedroom window, I'll see that figure watching me. Sometimes I wonder if we brought something back with us from the hacienda. Not physically, but like we opened some kind of door that can't be closed again. I'm writing this partly as a warning. There are places in this world that should be left alone, mysteries better left unexplored. The hacienda beyond the Twin Lakes is one of them. Whatever exists there has been there for a long time, and it should stay there, undisturbed. But I'm also writing this because I need to know if anyone else has experienced something similar, if anyone knows what that thing might have been, or how to make this feeling of being watched go away. Because right now, as I sit here typing this, I can feel eyes on me, and I'm terrified to turn around. Story 13. I still can't sleep right. It's been 3 weeks since it happened, and every little noise makes me jump. I've installed a security system and bought additional locks, but I don't know if anything will make me feel safe in my own home again. I live in Oakwood Hills, a quiet suburban neighborhood that borders a dense forest. My house sits at the end of a cul-de-sac, backing up to the woods. It's the kind of place where nothing ever happens. The reason I bought it in the first place. I wanted peace and quiet after living in the city for years. Funny how things turn out. That day started like any other. I work from home as a software developer, and I'd spent most of the day coding and on Zoom calls. By 5 in the afternoon, I was wrapping up, thinking about what to make for dinner. It was early January, cold as hell outside with a dusting of snow from the night before. The sun was already setting, and I remember thinking how dark it gets so early this time of year. Around 5:30, my friend Kyle called. His car had broken down about 20 minutes away, and he needed a ride home. We've been friends since college, and he's helped me out plenty of times, so I didn't mind. I told him I'd be there in half an hour. I put on my coat, grabbed my keys from the hook by the door, and was just about to leave when my doorbell rang. This was unusual. I rarely get unexpected visitors, especially in the evening. I figured maybe it was a package delivery or something. When I opened the door, I froze. There was a man sitting on the ground, literally just a few feet from my doorway. He was wearing a heavy dark coat and a black scarf wrapped around the lower half of his face. Only his eyes were visible. He looked up at me, and something about his eyes made my stomach drop. "Sorry," he said, his voice muffled by the scarf. "I was just knocking." He stood up slowly, brushing snow off his pants. "Are you David, or maybe Daryl?" "My name is Thomas." I told him no, that he had the wrong house. "Oh," he said, nodding slightly. "My mistake." Then he just walked away. He didn't seem rushed or nervous. He just turned and headed toward the street. I stood there for a moment, watching him go. Something felt off about the whole interaction, but I couldn't put my finger on why. Why was he sitting on the ground? Who sits down after knocking on someone's door? And why wear a scarf that covers most of your face when asking for someone? I brushed it off and went to pick up Kyle. The whole drive, though, I kept thinking about that guy. Something about him just felt wrong. I dropped Kyle off at his place around 8:30 and headed back home. It had started raining lightly, that cold winter rain that feels like it's seeping into your bones. I pulled into my driveway around 9, eager to get inside where it was warm. As soon as I got home, I double-checked that my front door was locked. I'm not normally paranoid, but that encounter had me on edge. I made myself some dinner, just a microwave meal, and tried to relax by watching TV. But I couldn't focus. My mind kept going back to that man at my door. Around 10, I found myself walking to my front door and looking through the peephole. The street light cast a dim glow, enough for me to see that there were footprints in the light snow, leading from the street to my car and then toward the wooded area at the side of my yard. Fresh footprints that weren't there before I left. My heart started racing. Someone had been in my yard while I was gone. I backed away from the door, trying to tell myself I was overreacting. Maybe it was just a neighbor walking their dog. Maybe someone had gotten lost and walked up to check the house number. There could be a dozen innocent explanations, but deep down, I knew it was him, the man from earlier. I checked all my doors and windows to make sure they were locked. My house isn't huge, a 2-bedroom ranch style, but I went through every room, turning on lights, looking in closets, making sure no one had somehow gotten in while I was gone. Everything seemed normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I kept glancing out the windows, expecting to see someone staring back at me. By 11, I'd worked myself up so much that I decided to call the police. I felt stupid doing it. What was I going to tell them? That a man asked for directions and now I'm scared? That there are footprints in my yard? But the uneasy feeling wouldn't go away. I dialed 911, and when the operator answered, I tried to explain the situation without sounding like a complete lunatic. There was a man at my door earlier asking for someone who doesn't live here, I said, and now there are fresh footprints in my yard that weren't there before. I live alone, and my house is pretty isolated. The operator was kind, but didn't seem overly concerned. She asked if I'd seen anyone on my property now, or if I'd heard anything suspicious. I said no, just the footprints and the strange man earlier. We can send an officer to drive by, she offered, but it might be a while. We have several incidents we're responding to right now. I was about to thank her and hang up when I heard it, a loud, violent pounding from the back of my house. It was the sound of someone trying to force their way in. "Someone's trying to break in," I shouted into the phone. "They're at my back door." I looked down the hallway that led to my back door, and I could see movement through the window in the door, a dark shape moving back and forth. The pounding continued, a heavy thudding sound like someone was using a tool to break through. "Sir, is there somewhere safe you can go?" the operator asked, her tone suddenly urgent. "Can you get to your car without going near the back door?" My front door was maybe 15 feet away from where I stood. My car keys were hanging on the hook beside it. "I think I can get to my car," I said, my voice shaking. "Do it now," she instructed. "Get to your car, lock the doors, and drive away. Officers are on their way." The pounding at my back door grew more intense. I heard the crack of wood splitting. I grabbed my keys and phone and ran to the front door. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock it. The whole time I kept expecting to hear my back door give way, to feel someone grab me from behind. I finally got the door open and ran to my car, the cold rain hitting my face. I fumbled with my car keys, nearly dropping them. Behind me, I heard a loud crash from inside my house, the sound of my back door finally giving way. I got my car door open, jumped in, and locked it immediately. As I started the engine, I caught a glimpse of movement at my front door. A dark figure stepping out onto my porch. I threw the car into reverse and peeled out of my driveway, not even looking where I was going. I just needed to get away. In my rearview mirror, I saw the figure watching me from my front yard, just standing there in the rain. I drove straight to a gas station about 2 miles away and waited there for the police to call me back. I was shaking uncontrollably, partly from the cold since I'd left without a coat, but mostly from fear. When the police called, they told me they were at my house and asked me to come back. I was terrified to return, but they assured me they had multiple officers there and had cleared the house. When I pulled back into my driveway, there were 3 police cruisers with their lights flashing. An officer approached my car as I parked. "We've searched the house and surrounding area," he told me. "Whoever it was is gone now." They showed me my back door. It had been forced open, The frame splintered around the lock. There were fresh footprints throughout my house. The intruder had gone through every room. The officer asked me for a description of the man I'd seen earlier, but all I could tell them was that he was average height, wearing a dark coat, and had a black scarf covering most of his face. Not much to go on. They took my statement and promised to increase patrols in the area. One officer suggested the man at my door had been checking if anyone was home, a common tactic for burglars. He'd come back thinking the house was empty, not expecting me to return when I did, but I can't shake the feeling that it was more than that. The way he was sitting at my doorstep, the way he watched me drive away, it felt personal somehow. And the methodical way he checked every room in my house, it was like he was looking for something or someone. I stayed at a hotel that night and for several days after. When I finally returned home, I had a security company install a system with cameras and motion sensors. I bought new, stronger locks for all my doors and windows, but I still don't feel safe. I keep replaying that moment in my head, opening my door to find him sitting there, those cold eyes looking up at me. The police never found him. There have been no other break-ins reported in my neighborhood. Sometimes I wonder if he'll come back, if he'll try again, or if he got what he was looking for that night. I don't know which possibility terrifies me more. I'm writing this because I need to tell someone who might understand. I need to know I'm not crazy for still being afraid 3 weeks later. Every noise makes me think he's back. Every time my doorbell rings, I expect to see him sitting there again. The thing that haunts me most is how calculated it all seemed. This wasn't random. He had a plan. He knew exactly what he was doing. And for all I know, he's still out there, watching, waiting for the right moment to come back. Story 14. I still have trouble sleeping some nights, even though it's been over 6 years since it happened. I've never told anyone about this before. Not my parents, not my friends, nobody. But I need to get this off my chest because the memories still haunt me, and I'm hoping writing it down might help. During my junior year of high school, I was heavily into running, cross-country in the fall, track in the spring, and I kept up my training all year round. I was good at it too, not state champion material or anything, but I could hold my own. Running was my escape. When I ran, all the stress of school, college applications, and teenage drama just melted away. That spring, I found what seemed like the perfect opportunity. This woman, Mrs. Caldwell, who lived about 2 miles from my neighborhood near this big forest preserve, posted an ad in our local Facebook group looking for someone to run her dog several times a week. She had this young husky mix named Izzy, who had way too much energy, and Mrs. Caldwell couldn't keep up with her. She offered $10 per run, which wasn't much, but it felt like a dream setup. I'd get paid to do what I was already doing anyway. The area where she lived was kind of isolated. There were scattered houses, some abandoned farmland, even an old cemetery nobody visited anymore. My parents weren't thrilled with the idea of me running out there alone, especially as the days got shorter. There were all these local legends about the area. Apparently some kind of cult community had lived out there in the 70s before disbanding. My dad kept telling me to be careful, but I just brushed it off. I was 17, fast as hell, and thought I was invincible. Nothing could happen to me that I couldn't outrun. God, I was stupid. It was a Thursday in late April when it happened. I remember because I had a math test the next day that I was dreading. I arrived at Mrs. Caldwell's around 6:30 in the evening. The sun was getting lower in the sky, casting this deep orange glow over everything. Mrs. Caldwell handed me Izzy's leash and reminded me not to let her chase any wildlife. Normal stuff. I decided to take a longer route that day. The weather was perfect, cool but not cold, with just a light breeze. We headed out on the main road before turning onto one of the less traveled paths that would loop through part of the forest preserve. Izzy was in a great mood, practically pulling me along. I wasn't wearing my watch that day, but I estimate we were about 2 miles in when everything changed. We had reached this stretch of road where the trees grew thick on both sides. The sun was setting faster now, and shadows were stretching across the pavement. Suddenly, Izzy stopped dead in her tracks. Her ears perked up, and she stared intently into the forest on our right. I tugged at her leash, but she wouldn't budge. That's when I followed her gaze and saw him. There was a man partially hidden behind one of the larger trees about 20 yards into the woods. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there watching us. Even from that distance, something felt off about him. He was short, maybe 5'6", and thin. He looked to be in his 30s, wearing jeans and a thin, long-sleeved shirt, despite the mild temperature. The shirt was pulled down low over his face, like he was trying to hide his features, but I could see his eyes. They were fixed on me, unblinking. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I tried to stay calm. People hike in the woods all the time, right? I awkwardly smiled and nodded in his direction, then continued jogging, tugging Izzy along with me. She reluctantly followed, but kept looking back. About half a mile later, Izzy stopped again. My stomach dropped as I turned around. The man had moved. He was now standing at the tree line just off the road, maybe 50 feet behind us. He wasn't pretending to hike anymore. He was just standing there, still staring, his body slightly hunched forward like he was studying us. Something in my gut was screaming that this wasn't right, that this wasn't just some harmless stranger. I picked up the pace, trying to act normal while my heart hammered in my chest. I kept moving forward, but couldn't stop myself from constantly looking over my shoulder. After a couple of minutes, I didn't see him anymore and started to relax slightly. Maybe he was just some weirdo who liked scaring people. Maybe I was overreacting. Then I noticed movement in my peripheral vision. He had somehow circled ahead of us. I don't know how he did it so quickly, but there he was, now standing about 100 yards in front of us on the path. And this time, I could see what he was holding, a cleaver, an actual fucking cleaver like the kind butchers use. Pure terror exploded through my body. I've never felt anything like it before or since, like ice water being injected directly into my veins. I yanked Izzy's leash and took off running harder than I ever had in my life. My lungs were burning almost immediately, and poor Izzy was struggling to keep up, but fear pushed me forward. I made the mistake of looking back once. He was chasing us, but something was wrong with the way he moved. His arms flailed in an odd pattern, not the normal pumping motion of a runner. His feet seemed to be moving almost too quickly, like a video being fast-forwarded. But the most disturbing thing, and I swear this is true, was that he wasn't breathing. I could hear my own desperate gasping, Izzy's panting, our footfalls on the pavement. But from him, there was nothing. Footsteps, yes, but no sound of breathing, no grunting with effort. Just that horrible silence beneath the sound of his shoes. I veered off the path and started cutting through yards of the scattered houses. I zigzagged as much as I could, hoping to lose him. Izzy was getting tired, but adrenaline kept us both moving. I ducked between houses, jumped a small fence, ran through someone's garden. I have no idea how long we ran like that. It could have been 5 minutes or 20. Time seemed to stretch and contract. Finally, when I thought my lungs would explode, I pressed myself against the wooden wall of what I think was someone's shed. gasping for breath. Izzy collapsed at my feet, her tongue hanging out. I strained my ears, listening for footsteps, but heard nothing. After gathering my courage, I peered around the corner. He was standing at the top of a small hill about 200 yards away. He wasn't chasing anymore, just watching. The cleaver hung at his side, glinting in the last rays of sunlight. His face, what I could see of it, showed no emotion, no anger, no frustration, not even the exertion you'd expect after chasing someone for that distance. Just that blank, unblinking stare. We stayed like that for what felt like eternity, me hiding, him watching. Then a car's headlights appeared in the distance, coming down the road toward us. He turned without hesitation and walked back into the woods, disappearing between the trees as if he'd never been there. I waited until I couldn't see him anymore, then took the longest route back to Mrs. Caldwell's house, sliding through yards and staying away from the main road. I must have looked terrible when I arrived because Mrs. Caldwell asked if I was okay. I mumbled something about pushing too hard on the run and being exhausted. She paid me and offered to drive me home, but I declined. I couldn't bear the thought of being in a car that would drive past those woods. I never told anyone what happened. I knew if I told my parents, they'd never let me go running alone again, and running was the one thing that kept me sane during high school. But I never ran in that direction again. I still ran Izzy 3 times a week for the rest of the school year, but always in the opposite direction, in populated areas and never close to sunset. To this day, I don't know who or what that man was. Maybe he was some drifter with mental health issues. Maybe he was connected to that old cult from the 70s. Maybe he was something else entirely. What keeps me up at night isn't just the memory of him chasing me. It's the way he moved, the unnatural silence of his breathing, the blank stare. Sometimes when I'm running alone, even now in college in a completely different state, I get this prickling sensation on the back of my neck, and I can't help but look over my shoulder, half expecting to see him standing there, watching me with those unblinking eyes. I wish I could say I've gotten over it, but that would be a lie. There are some trails near my campus that remind me of those woods, and I can't bring myself to run there, even in broad daylight, with dozens of other people around. Whenever I see someone standing too still, watching people from a distance, my heart rate spikes and I have to fight the urge to run. What scares me most is the randomness of it all. Why me? Why that day? Was he waiting for anyone who happened to come down that path, or was I specifically targeted? And if I was targeted, does that mean he's still out there, waiting for me to drop my guard? I don't have answers to any of these questions. All I know is that something happened to me that day that I can't explain, and I'm still looking over my shoulder, still running from the memory of a man with a cleaver who made no sound when he breathed. Story 15. I've been meaning to write this down for weeks, but honestly, just thinking about that night makes my hands shake. I guess I need to get this off my chest, though. I work, or rather worked, at this little ice cream shop called Frosty's in Pinheiros. It's this tiny place in a shopping complex that's basically a ghost town now. Most of the stores closed down years ago when the big mall opened on the other side of town. Our shop somehow survived, probably because we're the only place that stays open 24 hours, and we're right next to Pinheiros Park where all the teens hang out. The night shift usually sucks, but the pay is better, and I needed the money for college. The shop is seriously small, maybe 4 little tables, a counter with 6 stools, and barely enough room to move behind the counter. On a good night, I'd get a handful of customers between midnight and 6 in the morning, mostly teenagers after hanging out at the park or drunk people wanting something sweet after the bars closed. That night, it was a Thursday in July, started like any other. I came in at 11 p.m., relieved Maria, the evening shift girl, and settled in for my usual boring 6 hours. Around midnight, a group of 5 teenagers came in laughing and shoving each other. Regular customers, the kind who'd buy 1 scoop each and then sit for an hour talking loudly. They left just after 1 in the morning, and the place fell completely silent. I was feeling pretty tired since I'd stayed up studying for my economics exam the night before. The trash was piling up, so I figured I'd take it out to the dumpster behind the building. At least it would wake me up a bit. The back door of our shop opens onto this narrow alley that runs behind the whole complex. It's always dark back there because half the security lights are broken, and nobody bothers fixing them. I remember feeling that weird sensation like someone was watching me, but I brushed it off. We all get that feeling in creepy places, right? After tossing the garbage, I was walking back to the door when I noticed something that made me freeze. There was this weird flickering light coming from one of the abandoned stores connected to ours. Not steady like a flashlight, but erratic, almost like candlelight, or maybe a faulty bulb. The store used to be a clothing boutique, but had been empty for at least 3 years. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, just staring. The parking lot was completely empty, no cars that could be causing reflections. My first thought was teenagers. We get a lot of kids who break into the abandoned stores to smoke or whatever. But something about this light felt different, wrong somehow. I hurried back inside and locked the door behind me. I tried to laugh it off, told myself I was being stupid, but I couldn't shake this growing sense of unease. I was wiping down the counter when I heard it, this faint scratching sound coming through the wall we share with the abandoned store. It was so quiet I almost missed it, but in the silence of the empty shop, it was unmistakable. Scratch, scratch, pause, scratch. I pressed my ear against the wall, wondering if maybe it was just pipes or rats. The building is old, after all. Then it stopped. I was about to step away when there was a loud bang from the front of the shop. I nearly jumped out of my skin. It was just the bell on the door. A customer had walked in, but the way he pushed the door made it hit the wall harder than usual. This is where things get really weird. The guy who walked in looked about 45 or 50, with this long, stringy gray hair that hung past his shoulders. He wore a faded brown jacket despite the summer heat, and he had this, I don't know how to describe it, this intensity in his eyes. Not angry exactly, but focused in a way that made my skin crawl. "Evening," I said, trying to sound normal. "What can I get you?" He didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge that I'd spoken. He just stood there staring at me, then slowly looked around the shop like he was taking inventory. His eyes lingered on the security camera in the corner, which hasn't worked in years, but customers don't know that. Then he looked at the back door, the one I'd just come through. After what felt like forever, he looked back at me and smiled. Not a normal, friendly smile. His lips barely moved, but his eyes crinkled in this way that made my stomach turn. Without ordering anything, he turned and walked out. I remember standing there, my heart racing, trying to make sense of what just happened. I kept telling myself I was overreacting. Maybe he just realized he'd forgotten his wallet. Maybe he didn't speak English well. Maybe he was just socially awkward. But deep down, I knew something was very wrong. I checked my phone. It was 1:20 in the morning, 4.5 hours left on my shift. The thought of staying there suddenly felt impossible. I decided to take my lunch break early just to clear my head and calm down. We're allowed a 30-minute break, and I usually ate in the back room, but that night I grabbed my sandwich and decided to eat in my car. I just needed to be somewhere else for a bit. My car was parked right in front of the shop where I could see the entrance. I locked the doors, turned on the radio, and tried to eat, but my appetite was gone. I kept watching the entrance to the shop through my windshield, half expecting the strange man to return. And then he did. Around 1:40, I noticed movement at the edge of the parking lot. The man with the gray hair was walking toward the shop, but he wasn't alone. There was someone with him, another man, shorter but stockier, wearing a dark hoodie despite the warm night. They weren't walking like normal customers. They were moving quickly, purposefully, with their heads down, occasionally glancing around. The way they moved reminded me of predators. The gray-haired man pointed toward my car, then shook his head and gestured toward the shop. My blood ran cold. They weren't expecting me to be in my car. They thought I was still inside the shop. Without thinking, I ducked down in my seat and called 911. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. 911, what's your emergency? I think someone's about to rob the ice cream shop at Pine Shopping Center, I whispered. There are two men acting really suspicious, and one of them was in the shop earlier scouting it out. Are you in danger right now, sir? I don't know. I'm in my car, but they're heading into the shop where I work. I think they're looking for me. The dispatcher asked me to stay on the line and said officers were on their way. I peeked over my dashboard and watched as the men entered the shop. Through the glass front, I could see them looking around. The gray-haired man went straight to the counter and leaned over it, looking into the back room. The other man was checking the corners of the shop. They were in there for less than a minute before they came out. The gray-haired man looked angry. He said something to his companion, and they both looked directly at my car. I ducked down again, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I heard the dispatcher asking if I was still there, but I couldn't speak. I was terrified they'd hear me. Then I heard footsteps on the pavement, getting closer to my car. I was paralyzed with fear, curled up in the footwell of the driver's seat, clutching my phone like it was a lifeline. The footsteps stopped. I heard a voice, low and rough, right outside my window. Check behind the building. More footsteps, moving away. I stayed frozen, afraid to even breathe. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds, I heard sirens in the distance. The footsteps by my car suddenly took off running. When I finally dared to look, both men were gone. The police arrived about 2 minutes later, 2 patrol cars with lights flashing. I got out of my car, legs shaking so badly I could barely stand. The officers took my statement and then searched the area. What they found confirmed everything. The back door of the abandoned store next to the ice cream shop had been jimmied open. Inside, they found evidence someone had been staying there. A sleeping bag, food wrappers, and an electric lantern, explaining the light I'd seen. Most disturbing of all, they found a hunting knife and several lengths of rope. The officer who showed me these things said it looked like someone had been living in the abandoned store for at least a few days, watching the shop through a small hole they'd made in the shared wall, right at eye level behind our napkin dispenser. The scratch marks I'd heard were probably from them widening this hole. They never caught the men. The security cameras in the parking lot hadn't worked in years, and my description could match hundreds of people. The police think the gray-haired man had been watching me for days, learning my routine, waiting for a night when I was alone for hours. I quit that job the next day. I still have nightmares about what might have happened if I hadn't decided to take my break in my car that night. Sometimes I wake up hearing that scratching sound from the wall or seeing that unnatural smile. The thing that haunts me most is knowing they're still out there. And sometimes when I'm walking alone at night, I can't shake the feeling that someone is watching me, waiting for the right moment. Story 16. I still have trouble sleeping when I think about what happened at Camilla's beach house last year. I've never been able to shake the feeling that things could have gone so much worse if not for her cat. As weird as that sounds, my friend Camilla asked if I could house sit for her while she took her family on vacation to visit her parents in Mexico. She has this gorgeous beachfront property in Puerto Sereno. It's this small coastal town about 2 hours from where I live. Super quiet place, the kind where everyone knows everyone. The house is pretty isolated, sitting on this little stretch of private beach with the nearest neighbor about half a mile away. When she asked me, I actually thought it was perfect timing. I'd been so stressed with work and desperately needed somewhere quiet to recharge. "It'll be like a mini vacation for you too," Camilla had said. "Just you and Molly." Molly is her cat, this gray, aloof little thing that mostly keeps to herself. All I had to do was feed her and make sure she had water. Camilla mentioned that Molly was super independent, and I probably wouldn't see much of her. The forecast had predicted storms all weekend, but I didn't mind. I packed my laptop, some books, and planned for a quiet, rainy weekend, catching up on Netflix. I arrived on Friday afternoon, and everything was just as peaceful as I'd imagined. The house had these huge windows facing the ocean, and even with the darkening clouds rolling in, the view was incredible. That first night was uneventful. I made dinner, read for a bit, and went to bed early, lulled to sleep by the sound of rain hitting the windows. Molly, true to Camilla's description, kept her distance, only appearing briefly when I filled her food bowl. Then Saturday happened, and everything changed. I woke up around 8 and spent the morning just lounging around, enjoying the stormy weather from inside the cozy house. Around 11, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway, thinking it might be Camilla checking in, from Mexico. There was nothing but silence on the other end. "Hello?" I said, but no one answered. I hung up, figuring it was a wrong number or a bad connection. 10 minutes later, the same number called again. This time, I let it ring a few times before answering, but the result was the same: complete silence. I hung up again, feeling slightly annoyed. When the number called a third time about 20 minutes later, I didn't answer, but they left a voicemail. When I listened to it, my skin crawled. It was a man's voice, very quiet, almost a whisper. Camilla. That was it. Just her name, spoken like a question. Then silence, then the call ended. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, maybe one of Camilla's friends who didn't know she was out of town, but something about the way he said her name made me uneasy. I texted Camilla to ask if she knew anyone who might be trying to reach her at the house, but with the time difference and her being on vacation, I figured it might be a while before she responded. The phone rang twice more that afternoon, same number. I didn't answer either time, and they didn't leave any more messages. By the time evening rolled around, I was feeling jumpy and on edge. The storm had gotten worse, with heavy rain and wind that made the house creak and moan. I kept checking that all the doors and windows were locked, which I knew was probably an overreaction, but I couldn't help myself. Around 7, I was in the kitchen making dinner when I noticed Molly sitting by the front door. She was completely still, just staring at it intently like she was waiting for something. I called to her, but she ignored me completely, which wasn't unusual given how independent she was. What was unusual was how focused she seemed on that door. I walked over, thinking maybe she heard something I couldn't over the storm. As I got closer, I felt a sudden chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Through the foggy glass panel beside the door, I could make out a dark shape on the porch. Someone was standing there, not moving, just watching the house. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I froze, not sure what to do. The shape didn't move. It was hard to tell through the distorted glass and the rain, but it looked like a person wearing dark clothes, just standing there in the pouring rain, watching. I took a step closer to the door, not sure what I was going to do. Certainly not open it. I stared at the figure for what felt like forever, but was probably just a minute or two. My mind was racing, trying to come up with rational explanations. Maybe it was someone who got lost in the storm. Maybe a neighbor checking on the house. But deep down, I knew. This was connected to those phone calls. Someone was looking for Camilla. I backed away from the door, not wanting whoever it was to know I'd seen them. I went to the kitchen, pretending to go about my business, but my hands were shaking so badly I had to grip the counter to steady myself. I peeked at Molly, who was still fixed on the door. After a moment, I gathered my courage and went back to check again. The figure was gone. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Maybe they'd just been seeking shelter from the storm and moved on. I didn't really believe that, but I desperately wanted to. I spent the next hour pacing the house, checking and rechecking locks, and drawing all the curtains. I tried calling Camilla again, but got her voicemail. I thought about calling the police, but what would I tell them? That someone stood on the porch during a storm? That I got some weird phone calls? I didn't have anything concrete to report. By 9 o'clock, I'd managed to calm myself down somewhat. I decided to watch a movie in Camilla's bedroom, which was at the back of the house, away from the front door. The bedroom had its own bathroom and a TV, so I could just hole up there for the night. I brought some snacks, locked the bedroom door behind me, and tried to distract myself with a comedy. Molly had followed me into the bedroom, which surprised me given how little attention she'd paid me until then. She jumped up on the bed and settled beside me. Having her there was actually comforting. The movie was helping me relax, and the storm seemed to be calming down a bit too. Then, around 10:30, Molly suddenly sat up. Her ears were perked, and her whole body went rigid. She jumped off the bed and walked slowly to the bedroom door. Then she did exactly what she'd done earlier, sat down and stared at it intently. My blood turned to ice. The bedroom door had one of those peepholes, the kind you usually find on front doors of apartments. Camilla had told me the previous owners had been extremely security conscious and had installed them on several interior doors too. I muted the TV and listened. The house was quiet, except for the now gentle patter of rain. Molly didn't move, didn't make a sound, just kept staring at that door. I don't know what made me do it. Some stupid horror movie curiosity that I should have ignored. I slid off the bed and crept toward the door, my heart hammering so loud I was sure anyone on the other side would hear it. I bent down slowly to look through the peephole. What I saw will haunt me for the rest of my life. There was someone sitting on the floor directly outside the bedroom door, so close that when I looked through the peephole, all I could see was the back of their head, dark hair wet from the rain, leaning against the door. just sitting there silently, inches away from where I stood. I gasped involuntarily, then clapped my hand over my mouth. The head moved. They'd heard me. They knew I was right there. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over Molly, who was now arching her back and hissing at the door. I heard a scrambling sound from the hallway, whoever it was getting to their feet. I lunged for my phone on the nightstand and dialed 911 with shaking fingers. 911, what's your emergency? Someone's in the house, I whispered, afraid they would hear me. They're right outside my door. Please hurry. I gave them Camilla's address, and they promised to send officers immediately. While I waited, I heard footsteps moving away from the door, down the hallway, then silence. I was terrified the intruder was just waiting somewhere else in the house, listening. I called Camilla next, my voice breaking as I left a desperate message explaining what was happening. When the police finally arrived about 20 minutes later, they found the front door unlocked. I swear to God I had locked it. I had checked it multiple times. They searched the entire house and the surrounding property but found no one. There were wet footprints in the hallway outside the bedroom, leading from the front door, proving I hadn't imagined it. Someone had definitely been in the house. The police officers were kind, but clearly skeptical when I told them about the phone calls and the figure on the porch. One of them suggested it might have been a homeless person seeking shelter from the storm, but I knew better. This person had been asking for Camilla by name. They had been watching the house. They had come inside and sat outside the bedroom door like they were waiting for something. One of the officers stayed with me while the other checked with neighbors. The closest neighbor hadn't seen anything suspicious, but they rarely paid attention to Camilla's house, especially during bad weather. When Camilla finally called back, she was frantic. She told the police she didn't know anyone who would be looking for her like that. Then she got quiet for a moment before admitting that about a month earlier, she'd noticed someone watching her house from the beach a few times. She'd thought it was just a tourist admiring the property. The police concluded it was likely a stalker who had been targeting Camilla and had either coincidentally picked the weekend she was away or had been planning to break into what they thought was an empty house. Maybe they were planning to wait for her to return from vacation. The thought makes me sick to my stomach. They took fingerprints but never found a match in their system. They increased patrols in the area for the next few weeks, but the person never came back. At least not that we know of. I didn't stay at the house that night. The police officer drove me to a hotel in town, and I came back the next day with a friend to pack my things. Camilla ended her vacation early and came home. To this day, we don't know who it was or what they wanted. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, remembering that moment of looking through the peephole and seeing someone sitting there so close I could have touched them if not for the door between us. Just sitting there, waiting in a house they shouldn't have been able to enter. And sometimes I wonder, if Molly hadn't alerted me, if I hadn't noticed them outside the bedroom door, how long would they have sat there? Would they have eventually tried to come in? What were they planning to do? I guess I'll never know, but I'll never house sit again, that's for damn sure. And I always check the peepholes in my own home now, just to be safe. Story 17. I've been a food delivery driver for about a year and a half now. It's a decent gig, flexible hours, decent tips, and I get to listen to my podcasts while cruising around town. Most nights are pretty routine. I pick up food, drop it off, repeat. Nothing exciting. But what happened to me 3 nights ago has me seriously considering quitting. I haven't been able to sleep properly since. I keep replaying everything in my head, wondering what would have happened if I'd made different choices. It was a Wednesday night, pretty slow for deliveries. I was parked outside a McDonald's, scrolling through TikTok, waiting for an order to come through. Around 9:20, my phone pinged with a new delivery request. The payout was $18 for what looked like a 20-minute drive, which is way better than the usual $6 or $7 orders I get. The destination was somewhere I'd never delivered to before, outside of Mataiskura, heading toward the next town over. I accepted it without thinking much about it. The restaurant was a local burger joint I'd picked up from dozens of times. I grabbed the order, 2 burgers, fries, and a chocolate shake, and hit the road. Now, if you're not familiar with Mataiskura, it's a small town surrounded by dense forest. To get to the next town, there's basically one road, this narrow, winding 2-lane stretch that cuts through miles of thick woods. During the day, it's actually pretty scenic. At night, different story entirely. About 15 minutes into the drive, I started to get that feeling something wasn't right. The houses had completely disappeared, and I was driving through pitch-black forest on both sides. My headlights barely cut through the darkness, and there were no streetlights out here. My GPS said I was getting close, but I couldn't see any driveways or turn-offs. When my GPS announced, "You have arrived at your destination," I was literally in the middle of nowhere, just forest on both sides of the road. No mailbox, no house number, no driveway, nothing. I pulled over to the side of the road, keeping my engine running and headlights on. I double-checked the address in my delivery app, then pulled up Google Maps to see if maybe my GPS was off. Nope, both showed the same location. I zoomed in on the satellite view but couldn't make out any structures nearby. At this point I was annoyed but not scared. I figured the customer probably put in the wrong address, so I called them through the app. The phone rang 3 times before they picked up. Right as it connected, I swear I saw something flash in the woods, like someone turning on a flashlight for just a second, maybe 100 yards into the trees. "Hello?" a man's voice answered. He sounded middle-aged, with this slight raspiness to his voice. "Hey, this is Lucas with your food delivery. I'm at the address you provided, but I'm not seeing any house here, just the road and forest. Did you maybe enter the wrong address?" No, you're in the right spot," he said quickly. "The driveway is just hard to spot in the dark. It's not paved, more of a dirt path." I looked out my window again, scanning the tree line with my high beams. "I don't see any driveway, man. Is there a mailbox or something I should look for?" "We're about 50 yards from the road. If you get out of your car and look carefully, you'll see the path. It's right where you're parked." Something about the way he said, "Get out of your car," made my stomach tighten. I didn't want to get out. Then I saw that flash of light again, deeper in the forest. Definitely a flashlight or phone light. "I see your light," I said. "Are you in the woods right now?" There was a pause, too long of a pause. "Yes, I'm outside waiting for you. Just follow the path into the trees. It's not far." Now, I was getting seriously uncomfortable. If this guy could see me from the forest, why wasn't he coming to the road to get his food? Or at least to the edge of the forest where I could see him? And why wasn't there a proper driveway if someone lived here? "Listen," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "I don't see any path. Maybe you could come to the road and I'll hand you the food here?" "I can't do that," he said quickly. "I have a bad knee. Just park and walk in. It's right there, I promise. Look for the gap between the big pine trees." I reluctantly turned off my engine but kept my headlights on. Food Delivery Safety 101. Never turn off your lights at a drop-off location. especially somewhere isolated. I grabbed my phone, the food bag, and stepped out of my car, leaving the door open. The night was dead, silent except for the chirping crickets and the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. The air felt colder than it should have for April. I stood at the edge of my headlight's reach, peering into the darkness. And that's when I noticed something I hadn't seen from inside the car. There was a small break in the underbrush, what might generously be called a path, but was really more like a game trail. It was narrow, maybe 2 feet wide, with branches hanging low overhead. Definitely not a driveway. No car had ever driven down this. My heart was racing now. Every instinct was screaming that this wasn't right. I stepped back toward my car and called the customer again. "Hey, I see what might be a path, but there's no way that's a driveway. Are you sure this is your house? I don't see any building?" Yes, he said, sounding impatient now. "We're just beyond the trees. Look, I can see you standing there in your blue jacket. Just walk down the path about 40 yards. My blood went cold. I was wearing a blue jacket. He could see me, but I couldn't see him. And how did he know exactly what I was wearing? The app doesn't tell customers that. I heard rustling in the forest, like someone moving through underbrush, still too far away to see, but it was getting closer. "Actually, sir," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "company policy says I can't leave food more than 20 feet from my vehicle in unlit areas. I'm going to leave your order here at the entrance to the path, okay?" "No, don't do that," he said, voice suddenly sharp. "Just bring it to me. I'm right here in the clearing." The rustling sounds were getting closer. I quickly set the bag down at the start of the path, snapped a delivery photo, and backed toward my car. "Food's been delivered at the path entrance. Have a good night," I said, then ended the call. As I was getting into my car, I heard the rustling get louder and faster. Someone was definitely coming through the woods toward the road, now moving quickly. I jumped in my car, slammed the door, locked it, and threw it in drive. As I pulled away, my rear-view mirror caught a glimpse of my headlights illuminating a figure emerging from the tree line, a tall, shadowy silhouette at the edge of the forest. I couldn't make out any features, just this dark shape standing where I'd been moments before. I floored it, tires squealing as I accelerated away. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the steering wheel. I drove like hell back toward town, constantly checking my mirrors to make sure I wasn't being followed. When I finally got back to the populated part of Mataiskura, I pulled into a gas station parking lot and just sat there, trying to calm down. I reported the incident to the delivery app, but their response was basically just, "Thanks for letting us know," with no real follow-up. I've been delivering in this area for over a year and know most of the houses on the outskirts of town. There is absolutely no house or structure where I was sent. That path wasn't a driveway. It was barely wide enough for a person to walk through. No one lives there. The more I think about it, the more convinced I am that the whole thing was a setup. Why order food to the middle of nowhere? Why insist I walk into pitch-black woods alone at night? Why could they see me, but I couldn't see them? I can't help thinking about what might have happened if I'd followed that path into the forest. Would I have even made it back out? I checked the customer's profile after I got home. Brand new account, no previous orders, generic username. The address doesn't exist on any property records I could find online. I've done hundreds of deliveries to remote places, dirt roads, you name it. This wasn't just a hard-to-find house. This was someone trying to lure me into the woods. The thing that keeps me up at night is wondering if I'm the first driver they've tried this with, or if there are others who weren't as cautious as Me. I filed a police report yesterday, but without much to go on, I'm not sure what they can do. I'm still driving for now, but I've changed my settings to only accept orders in well-lit, populated areas. No more forest deliveries. No more remote drop-offs after dark. Trust your instincts, people. If something feels wrong, it probably is. I can't shake the feeling that I narrowly avoided becoming someone's missing persons report that night. Whatever was waiting for me in those woods, I'm certain it wasn't just a customer with a bad knee wanting their burger and fries. Story 18. I still can't believe this happened to me. I moved to America from Germany almost 2 years ago, and I'm still processing everything. I'm only writing this now because my therapist thinks it might help, but honestly, I still look over my shoulder every day. I came to Northern California as an au pair in September of 2021. I'm from a tiny village outside Cologne that nobody's ever heard of. Seriously, it has like 3,000 people and one grocery store. Coming to America was my big adventure after finishing school. My English was already pretty good, thanks to my British dad, so I figured I'd be fine. My host family lived in this gorgeous house in a rural suburb. The mom was a tech executive, the dad worked in finance, and they had 2 kids, a boy who was 8 and a girl who was 5. They were super nice, gave me my own little apartment above the garage, and basically treated me like family from day one. The kids were sweet too, and the schedule was easy enough that I had most evenings and weekends to myself. Within the first week, I met Jennifer, another au pair who lived 3 houses down. She was American, but had moved from Texas to California for the job. We clicked instantly. She was outgoing in a way I wasn't, always pulling me into new adventures. She discovered this college town about 20 minutes away with bars that didn't card too hard, and soon our weekends were filled with cheap beer and frat parties. Being European gave me automatic cool points, which was weird but kind of fun. It was a Sunday night in November when everything changed. We were at this bar called Tap that had become our regular spot. Jennifer was flirting with some guy at the pool table, and I was sitting alone at the bar nursing a beer when this tall guy with striking white blonde hair sat down next to me. "Du bist aus Deutschland, oder?" he asked with a smile. "You're from Germany, right?" I was shocked. Most Americans just assumed I was local until I spoke, and even then, they usually guessed I was British or something. But he'd picked out that I was German immediately. "Ja, wie hast du das gewusst?" I replied, asking how he knew. He switched to English with barely an accent. "Your necklace," he said, pointing to the small silver pendant my grandmother had given me. "That's a traditional Cologne design. I spent some time there in college." His name was Sebastian, Sebi for short. He was 27, worked in tech, like everyone else in Northern California. And unlike most guys who approached me at bars, he actually asked questions and listened to my answers. He knew about obscure German traditions, could name small cities, and even knew some dialect words my own friends back home didn't use. After about an hour, his friend Hunter showed up and immediately hit it off with Jennifer, who'd given up on pool table guy. At the end of the night, Sebi asked for my number. 3 days later, he texted to ask me out to dinner. I agreed, and he suggested Friday night. When I asked where we were going, he said he wanted to cook for me at his place. Normally, I'd say no to a first date at a guy's apartment, but after spending hours talking to him at the bar, I felt like I already knew him. Plus, Jennifer had Hunter's address and promised to check in. His apartment was nice, not fancy, but clean and well furnished. He made homemade pasta with a mushroom sauce that was actually really good, opened an expensive bottle of wine, and we talked for hours. He was funny, smart, and attentive. One thing led to another, and I ended up staying the night. The next morning, I properly noticed his apartment for the first time. The walls were covered with these striking black and white photographs, all landscapes. As I looked closer, I realized they were all from Germany, the Rhine, the Black Forest, the North Sea coast. When I mentioned this coincidence, he smiled and explained they were from his dad's collection. Apparently, his father was an aerial photographer who'd spent years documenting European landscapes. Then I saw it, a familiar curve of river, a church spire I'd seen my entire life, fields arranged in a pattern I knew by heart. It was my village, my actual village, the tiny, insignificant place where I grew up. The photo was taken from above, probably from a small plane, showing the entire settlement and the surrounding farmland. That's my home," I stammered, pointing at the frame. Sebi looked surprised. "Really? That's incredible. My dad took these years ago. It's from a series on Rhine Valley tributaries." "It's literally 20 minutes from my house," I said, still stunned by the coincidence. "What are the odds?" He laughed, wrapping his arms around me from behind. "Maybe it's fate." I laughed too, but something cold settled in my stomach. What were the odds, really? But I pushed the thought away. It was just a weird coincidence. Over the next few months, Sebi and I fell into a relationship. He was attentive, always texting to check in, bringing me little gifts, remembering details about my life. The sex was good. He was supportive of my work with the kids, and he even helped me navigate some drama with my host mom when she started adding extra duties to my schedule. But there were moments that made me uncomfortable. Little things at first. He'd mention a restaurant I liked but couldn't remember telling him about. He'd ask about my mom right after she'd called me, as if he somehow knew. Once when we were drinking, he started talking about always wanting a German wife, how he'd dated other foreign girls, but they weren't right. When I pressed him on what he meant, he said something about foreign girls being good with children in a way that made my skin crawl. At dinner one night, he ordered me a vegetarian dish without asking. When I mentioned I was surprised he remembered I didn't eat meat, he said, "I saw it on your Instagram." Later that night, I scrolled through my feed and realized the only post where I'd mentioned being vegetarian was from 3 years ago, buried deep in my profile. Then there was the lost purse incident. About 2 weeks after I arrived in America, before I'd even met Sebi, I lost my purse at a frat party. It had my driver's license, some cash, and my bank card. The bank card was used at a gas station before I could cancel it, but everything else just disappeared. I'd been so careful with my documents after that. The truth came out on a rainy night in February. We were at his place and Sebi had fallen asleep after drinking almost a full bottle of wine. His phone kept buzzing with notifications, and out of a curiosity I'm still ashamed of, I checked it. The screen showed several messages from someone named Hunter, the same friend from the bar. "Did you tell her about the cabin yet?" one message read. "Remember our deal, I get to meet her cousin when she visits," said another. Something about the messages felt off. I hesitated, then opened his photo gallery. That's when I found the folder labeled Wife. Inside were hundreds of screenshots of my social media posts going back months before we'd even met. There were translations of all my German captions, a document tracking my movements based on Instagram locations, screenshots of Jennifer's account showing me in the background of her photos, and most horrifying of all, a photo of my German driver's license, the one that had been in my purse when I lost it at that frat party my second night in America. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone. There were notes about my family, my work schedule, even the route I took when walking the kids to school. And there were messages, graphic, detailed messages between him and Hunter about their plans for me. One message from Sebi to Hunter read, "Found the perfect German girl. Exactly what I've been looking for. Isolated, far from family, dependent on her visa. This one won't escape." I felt like I was going to throw up. I put his phone back exactly where it was and pretended to sleep for the next 3 hours. My heart pounding so hard, I thought it might wake him. As soon as dawn broke, I made an excuse about needing to get home early for the kids, kissed him goodbye like everything was normal, and left. The minute I got home, I blocked him on everything: phone, social media, email. I told Jennifer everything, and she was horrified. She immediately blocked Hunter too. I changed all my passwords, made my accounts private, and started varying my routines with the kids. For the first week, it seemed like he was respecting my boundaries. Then the messages started coming from different numbers. "Why are you doing this? We were perfect together. I know you looked at my phone. I'll forgive you if you just talk to me." Each time, I blocked the new number without responding. I was terrified but determined not to engage. I told my host family I'd had a bad breakup and asked them not to give out any information about me if anyone called. They were understanding, but clearly didn't grasp the severity of the situation. About 3 months after I cut contact, I started noticing a silver car occasionally driving past our house. Sometimes it would be parked down the street. I only caught glimpses of the driver, but I knew it. I was him. I started documenting everything, taking photos of the car, noting dates and times, saving screenshots of the blocked messages. I'm still in California. My year-long contract with the host family ends in 2 months, and then I'm going back to Germany. I've been building a case to take to the police, but without concrete threats or physical confrontations, they haven't been much help so far. Jennifer's been my rock through all this. She walks with me everywhere, stays over when the host family is away, and has helped me document everything. The worst part is knowing he'd been watching me for months before we even met, that our chance encounter at the bar was completely orchestrated, that the photo of my village wasn't coincidence but part of his research, that he somehow got access to my driver's license from that lost purse. I still don't know how deep this goes or what he was ultimately planning. Every time my phone buzzes with an unknown number, my heart stops. Every time I see a silver car, I freeze. I sleep with my bedroom door locked and a chair propped against it. 2 months, just 2 more months, and I'll be on a plane home. But I can't shake the feeling that he's just waiting, watching, planning his next move. And I keep wondering, how many other girls has he done this to? And were they all as lucky as me to discover the truth before it was too late?